Monday. The best of any brightness really will be reserved across the far south, but even here we could just see a few showers develop. But for Scotland especially, a very wet picture here, although the far northwest may well just turn a little bit drier as we move into the afternoon. Mild for most of us, but up across the far north we're just starting to see this cold air just begin to move a bit further south, so a pretty cold afternoon to come for much of northern Scotland. Into the evening, another band of rain then begins to move into Scotland, so turning wet once again with, risk of some snow in places. Remaining fairly quiet for the time being across the south, but for all of us as we move into 2025, it's turning unsettled with the risk of some wind, rain and potentially snow.
There will be a light breeze in the morning, leading to a warm front. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
You could be joining the Great British Giveaway list of winners with your chance to grab a fantastic £50,000 in tax-free cash.
My name is Cliff.
And my name is Julie, and we won 25,000. I'd say don't hesitate, do it. If you're not in it, you've got no chance of winning it.
For another chance to win, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. You can call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB10 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 31st of January. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
3 incredible young people from Essex are planning to become the youngest people ever to row, not sail, row, across the Atlantic Ocean.
It's about for 3,000 miles.
It is.
Give or take.
Almost exactly that, Sam.
The 3 flying fish, so-called, consists of Anna, Dunk, Harry, Alan and Rowan Daly, who are preparing to row that 3,000 miles across the Atlantic. It would be the second largest ocean in the world, and the trio are aiming to do that challenge in support of the Teenage Cancer Trust.
Well, I'm very pleased to say that Anna and Harry from the Flying Fish join us now. Very good morning to both of you.
Good morning.
I think the two of you are bonkers, but brilliant. Absolutely incredible what you're doing to raise money for Teenage Cancer Trust. Why did you want to do this?
So our third person, Rowan, his friend actually died. So when he was in secondary school, I believe, one of his peers passed away, and Teenage Cancer Trust supported them and their family a lot. So it was definitely the right charity. Yeah, it was.
Absolutely awful. So you wanted to do something to raise money for teenage cancer. Why rowing?
So my dad did it in 2021.
The trip, the Atlantic trip?
Yeah, he rowed it as a pair. Where we live in Essex, they actually build the boats there. So we used to cycle round there past the boatyard, and he got interested and actually did it. He was the first year after COVID. And one night, we all met in the Air Cadets, so one night after Air Cadets, Rowan actually dropped me off home and the boat was outside. We were obviously waiting to get it sold. And I think he was asking some questions, and we stood there at my porch and went, Rowan said, I reckon we could do that. And I was like, yeah, I reckon we could. And then we brought Harry on board, and that's kind of how it all came together.
If people are watching and they want to support you, do you have a
GoFundMe
we've got
page social
yet?
media platforms at the Free Flying Fish. That's Facebook, Instagram and TikTok, and our GoFundMe links in all of the bios on there.
Fantastic.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Hello, good afternoon and welcome to GB News. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. And for the next few hours, me and my panel will be taking on some of the big topics hitting the headlines right now. This show is all about opinion. It's mine, it's theirs, and of course it's yours. We'll be debating, discussing, and at times we will disagree, but no one will be cancelled. So joining me for the next few hours, journalist and political commentator Jonathan Liss, and also broadcaster and journalist Danny Kelly. Coming up in my nickel, I take a look at some of the political memorable moments of 2024.
We are seeing the biggest landslide, the biggest majority for a Labour Party since Tony Blair's in 1997.
Has it been an annus horribilis? Then, as the spat between Reform UK and Kemi Badenoch heats up, is the Tory leader right to say that Nigel Farage should get less airtime on GB News? I've got to pull up on X asking you that very question. Is this the latest row on membership numbers? Just another example that she perhaps isn't up for the top job. And is it time for Labour to ditch Sir Keir Starmer?
We have been very clear that for working people, we are not going to increase their taxes. So that means we are not increasing income tax, national insurance or VAT.
Really? And in our poll of the day, do you agree with half of Britons who think 2025 will be worse than 2024? I suppose we were warned things would get worse before they got better. But before we get started, let's get your latest news with Sam Francis.
Nana, thank you, and good afternoon to you. Fast approaching 2 minutes past 3. Well, the top story this hour, Foreign Secretary David Lammy has offered his heartfelt condolences to the people of South Korea and Thailand. That's after a plane crash sadly killed 179 people. 2 crew members have been rescued, but all other people died in the incident. The youngest of those victims was just 3 years old, according to local media outlets, and 5 of those killed were children under the age of 10. It's understood the Boeing 737-800 jet, was making a second attempt at a crash landing after its landing gear failed to open. Well, travel and aviation expert Sally Gethin has been speaking to us about the events that led to that crash.
Seems to have suffered a catastrophic bird strike, which might sound nothing in the scheme of things, but actually, when you consider the powerful engines on board, any bird strike is very critical in a case like this. And that triggered a chain of events where the pilots could not keep in control. They could not deploy the landing gear in time. And then they ran out of runway effectively at that point. They skidded off the runway and they ran right into a wall. They have recovered one of the black boxes. Once they've recovered both black boxes, the investigation will begin.
The Azerbaijan Airlines plane that also crashed, killing 38 people in that incident, was damaged while over Russia due to shooting from the ground, according to the country's president. President Aliyev said he regretted that some circles in Russia had tried to hush up the truth about the crash by sowing false narratives about the causes. It comes after Russia's president, Vladimir Putin, apologised for what he called that tragic incident over Russian airspace in which Azerbaijan Airlines plane crashed after Russian air defences were fired against Ukrainian drones. The UK has since rejected Mr. Putin's apology and called for a full and independent investigation. The government has blamed the deaths of 3 migrants in the English Channel on ruthless criminals trying to overload what they've described as unseaworthy boats. At least 3 people died attempting to cross the Channel in small boats earlier this morning. A large-scale rescue operation off the coast of Calais began in the early hours after reports that around 50 people had struggled to board one of those boats. Officials confirmed the 3 people died, 45 others were rescued, with 4 being taken to hospital with hypothermia. The death toll, though, could rise, authorities have suggested, and it comes after news yesterday that 1,300 migrants have now made that journey since Christmas Day. Well, the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, has promised to smash the gangs behind the crossings, but now more than 22,000 people have arrived since he took office. The Prime Minister's approval ratings have been branded catastrophic with rural voters in a new poll following the planned tax raid on farmers. New polling by The Telegraph suggests that just 1 in 5 believe that Labour cares about people who live and work in the countryside. It's also understood that Sir Keir Starmer has been warned his ratings have suffered a catastrophic fall among countryside voters angered by his family farm tax. Meanwhile, the UK has pledged millions of pounds to help to Ukraine to help investigate Russian war crimes there. The Ministry of Defence announced it will give bodies, including the Ukrainian Prosecutor General's office, £4.5 million to help bring Russian war criminals to justice. The government had previously pledged more than £6 million to help prosecute war crimes. The UN concluded in 2022 that war crimes had been committed during the conflict, citing evidence of executions, torture and sexual and gender-based violence. And thick fog is set to cause further flight delays today, disrupting Gatwick Airport's busiest day of the holiday period. Flights at Stansted Airport were affected by the weather conditions yesterday, while live departure boards showed delays at Heathrow, Luton and at Manchester. The UK's main air traffic control provider said temporary restrictions will continue as airfields are affected by fog. Those are the latest headlines for now. I'll be back with you in half an hour. Now, though, it's over to Nana.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Good afternoon and welcome. It's just coming up to 7 minutes after 3 o'clock. This is GB News. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. Welcome. Coming up, the spat between Reform UK and Kemi Badenoch is heating up. The Tory leader, was she right to say that Nigel Farage should get less airtime on GB News? What do you think? Then in the Great British Debate, I'm asking, is this row another example that perhaps Kemi isn't up to the top job? And is it time for Labour to ditch Sir Keir Starmer? Uri Geller will also be joining me and asking whether it's time the UK prescribes the Houthis as a terror organisation. That is coming up in the next hour. As ever, send me your thoughts, post your comments, gbnews.com/you'll say. So Kemi Badenoch's spat with Reform UK has escalated over claims that she urged bosses at GB News to cut the airtime given to the Reform UK leader Nigel Farage. Now, they claim that during a meeting with the channel's chief executive, she said that GB News should not be a haven for my critics. Is the Tory leader shooting herself in the foot? That's the question. Joining me now is the Director of Popular Conservatives, Mark Littlewood, and also Reform UK MP Lee Anderson. All right, I'm going to start with you. Mark Littlewood, what are your thoughts on that? Kemi Badenoch.
Well, I don't think she actually leaked this information, and according to Angelo, the chief exec at GB News, they did have a very convivial, non-acrimonious meeting. And look, it is true, we're about to hear from one of them, that Reform spokespeople get a lot of time on GB News. But the way to correct that isn't to complain about it, it's to put yourself forward. If I'd been in Kemi's position, I would have asked GB News, can I have my own show, please? Can I have an hour a week? I'd quite like to talk to GB News viewers. I'd quite like to get some experts around the table to help me develop policy. What do you say to that? If you're complaining, you're losing. And I'd like to see a lot more Conservatives on GB News, a lot more people of all political stripes, rather than trying to diminish Reform spokespeople, because they actually show up and speak. But I want to see that from all political parties. And the best way of getting that is to put your front foot forward, not to complain about other people being on the television.
Well, listen, I can tell you, I've been at GB News from the very, very start. I'm old school. And I can tell you now that literally none of them would come on. So it was only the Conservative Party that would come on. So most of the time that GB News has been on air, we've had more Conservatives on the channel than anybody else, really. And they would come on air. The Labour Party were not so generous with their time. And in fact, we have contacted Kemi Badenoch's office and we're waiting for a response because I have invited her onto my show. Lee Anderson.
Yeah, I want to agree with Mark a little bit here. I mean, look, I was deputy chairman, Nana, of the Conservative Party. I had my own show on GB News, still have, by the way, and I was interviewing Tory MPs on my show. Phil and Esther were Tory MPs, had their own show. We've had other people. We've got Miriam on there. Jacob Rees-Mogg, Miriam Cates. You know, we've had other Tory MPs and ex-MPs on GB News presenting shows, doing whatever. I didn't hear Kemi Badenoch complaining then that, or, you know, the Labour Party might have complained at the time, as they do. But GB News has always been fair, you know, and when I'm in and around Parliament, I'm always asking MPs of all parties to come on the show, to come on the channel, and usually I get a big fat no. Sometimes they do, but, you know, it's a great platform, and I think it's a little bit childish to have a pop at GB News over this. That's if it's in fact true, because, you know, on my show, and I know on other shows as well, Nana, we do ask, you know, people from all parties, like I've said, to come on and try and make it fair and balanced. And we get told as presenters, Nana, that we must make it balanced and give everybody a fair crack of the whip.
Well, to be fair, and we always invite Labour politicians on as well. It's more difficult to get them on, and I think, you know, that's a shame, but we'd like to get everybody on. But with regard to this particular argument, you've got more members than us, or you're not telling the truth about your membership. Mark, is this fitting of a Conservative leader to be focusing on, some might say, such a petty issue?
It's a petty issue as such. I mean, congratulations to Lee and his party. They're recruiting thousands of members every day. And I think it would be remiss of those in the Conservative Party not to take notice of that. I think it's significant. It's probably not all of the talk of the town down the dog and duck, or it might be now because it's become such a news story. But it is significant. I think the misstep here was, why draw attention to a political rival that's doing well unless you're completely sure of your facts? I mean, if Kemi had really worked out that Reform had, for example, overstated its membership figures by a factor of 10 or 20 or 50, that they were out by 100,000, OK, you might be able to point that out. But according to independent media analysis, it's not the case. The number is basically right. I mean, if it's out at all, it's only by half a dozen. So a strange fight to pick, and I would have advised her against that. What I will say in her defence is I want a Conservative leader who's going to shoot from the hip. And that does mean that sometimes you're going to get something wrong. Usually my criticism of Kemi over the last 6 or 7 weeks is that she's been a bit too quiet, that she hasn't said enough. And if you want people to speak more, shoot from the hip more, then there are going to be some errors, I'm afraid. But I think this is one of them. The leader of the Conservative Party has managed to draw attention to the exploding, growing membership of a rival political party. Not great in PR terms from her perspective.
Well, she says that she's been watching the back end for days, so maybe there is other information and other sources, though. So she may have some other evidence that could suggest that something else is going on. I think she should be given time to explain herself. Do you not think that's fair? She should be given some time to explain herself before everyone sort of jumps jumps into the sort of mire with her and starts to judge her.
No, sure, that's absolutely right. She may well know something I don't. I'm not a techie at all. Nigel Farage and Reform have responded by saying that her accusation is false. They've called in 4 media organisations. I think it was The Spectator, The Telegraph, the FT and one other that escapes my mind, to look at the software, which they say on balance supports Reform's analysis rather than Kemi's. If Kemi knows something remarkable that I don't, fine, but then sort of say it, provide the technical analysis that shows Reform's got it wrong. So if you're going to come out of the traps fast, you've got to keep fighting, I think, or realise that you've made a misstep and take a step back. But she says she's got some information about the back end of this software. Fine, say what it is.
Lee Anderson, your thoughts then? Is it a bit petty-minded to bother with this particular fight?
I think it is. I think if Kemi's had time to keep watching our counter over the Christmas holidays, you probably should have been spending a little bit more time with doing something else. Maybe watching a Carry On film. I've heard there's a new one coming out now called Carry On Kemi, and now that would be a good watch because she's chosen a hill to die on, and it's not the right hill. She's picked a fight with Nigel. I mean, this is a result of a gentle tease with the graphics being shown onto CCHQ. She's come out swinging. If I'd have been advising Kemi, I'd have just said, ignore it, carry on, enjoy your Christmas, speak to your MPs, get ready for the new year, get ready for the battle ahead. But she's come out swinging, and it's backfired. It's made a small story, really, front page news for the past 3 or 4 days, and it's great news for us. Our membership is flying, 30,000 new members since last Sunday. That's incredible, absolutely incredible. We've got a conference coming up next Friday in Leicester. That's sold out. Every single conference we're going to now is sold out. And all she's doing is giving us a free advert.
But weren't you a supporter of Kemi Badenoch? Because I remember with the leadership race between Rishi Sunak and the others, you backed her camp.
Yeah, I did back her camp. Sometimes Nana, you have to back the best candidate in that bunch, and she was the best candidate in my opinion. But I could not foresee at that time when I was backing Kemi that we should do something like this. I mean, I like Kemi. I get on really well with her. I think she's a strong woman, decent politician. But it shows a little bit of political immaturity. I think stop picking fights with Nigel. It's a waste of time. You're never going to beat him. He's been at it, the thick end of 3 decades doing this sort of stuff. He has this sort of these sort of politicians for breakfast. He really does. You know, go and pick on Labour, go and pick on their policies. Leave us alone. We're doing all right. Thank you very much. And I tell you what, I'll just add to this. It's important because when I was deputy chairman, I went to over 100 associations to speak to members, fundraising, whatever. And the vast majority of Conservative members at those associations like Nigel Farage. They like what he's got to say. And now I'm visiting the same areas as a Reform MP at Reform associations. I'm seeing a lot of the same members there. That's the problem she needs to address, not whether or not our ticker counter is working on eggs.
All right. Well, listen. Sorry, final word. Mark Littlewood, briefly then, before we move on.
I'm just going to say, I'd hope a New Year's resolution from both Reform and Conservative. I don't know how this is all going to come together, but at some point we might have to work together to get rid of this ghastly government and to save Britain. It will be a good New Year's resolution on all sides. I think for those in Reform and those in the Conservatives to treat each other with respect and courtesy as we move forward, however our working relationship develops. I'd really like Kemi and Nigel and everybody in both parties to adopt that New Year's resolution for 2025.
Oh, that's so lovely. It's never going to happen. Thank you very much. I'm teasing you, Mark Littlewood, and also Lee Anderson. Thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. Right, well, a GB News spokesperson said the meeting took place without any acrimony and was very constructive. A Conservative Party spokesperson tells GB News Reform has delivered a Labour government that has cruelly cut winter fuel payments for 10 million pensioners, put the future of family farming and food security at risk, and launched a devastating raid on jobs, which will leave working people. May is a vote for a Labour council. Only the Conservatives can stop this. You should have stopped it when you were in office, shouldn't you? You're with me, I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio. Coming up, it's time for the first Great British debate this hour. Amid Kemi Badenoch's feud with Nigel Farage Reforms UK, is this another example that she isn't quite up to the job? What do you think? This is GB News.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
This is Britain's newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
Locals in Abingdon in Oxfordshire have signed a petition to keep the name of their local pub, and it's called The Midget. Now, this comes after a university lecturer led an 11-month campaign to change the name of the pub, and the owners, Green King, have caved in. But locals are fighting back, and GB News spoke to one resident, Leanne Thompson, for her thoughts earlier today.
I'm not feeling great about it, to be honest. You know, it's a pub that's been here for a very long time. It's called The Midget after a MG car, and they're changing it to the Roaring Range Rock, which a lot of people are not happy about. We know why they're changing it, but a lady apparently came in who was very upset at the offensive term for the name midget. But nobody here sees it as an offensive term. You don't see the midget and feel any kind of offence towards that. It's named after a car. If she was to actually come, she might actually know more about it, but apparently she's not even been into the pub. She's just heard about it and broadcasted on social media that she wanted the name changed because it's offensive, which as locals don't feel that way. It's the midget. It will always be the midget. And if you look, it's even still on Midget Close. So I don't know if they're going to change it to the Roaring Range Rock Close.
Do you know, you should walk into the Midget now and go, do you serve shorts? And just keep going on the joke. It's named after a car, the MG Midget, that was manufactured in the town of Abingdon for a while. The car was released in 1961. The Boozer was built in 1974, giving huge pride to the area. It wasn't named after midgets, you know, the Snow White and the 7 vertically challenged individuals variety. It's named after a car.
GB News, the People's Channel.
We're
proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/your say. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
21 minutes after 3 o'clock. If you just tuned in, welcome. This is GB News. We are Britain's news channel. I'm Nana Akua. Don't forget, you can download the GB News app. You can watch all of the programmes at your leisure. But it's time now for the first Great British Debate this hour. And I'm asking, is Kemi Badenoch up to the job? And she gets threatened with legal action by Reform, and many say that she is failing to come up with any actual policies or provide any opposition. So I'm asking you, was this the right thing for her to focus on when we've got so much going on regarding the Labour Party, where we need a really functioning, healthy opposition? So I'm asking you, is Kemi Badenoch actually up to the job? Joining me now, journalist and political commentator Jonathan Liss, also broadcaster and journalist Danny Kelly. I will start with you, Danny Kelly.
Do you know what it tells me? It tells me how rattled the establishment are with Reform. Now, love or hate Nigel Farage, personally, I like the guy a lot. Away from broadcasting, I'm in business. And when I speak to my customers, and if politics were to be brought up, I never bring it up, but if politics is to be brought up, you won't believe in the Midlands how many people, swathes of the country, particularly in the Midlands, are voting Reform because they need, or they feel that they need a change. And I agree with them. And Nigel Farage is such a threat. I thought Kemi Badenoch was a highly intelligent woman. And if she thought for 1 second, who is the politician in the UK who is under the most scrutiny? It's Nigel Farage. Does she honestly think he is going to authorise someone to blag numbers on a website where demonstrably it can be proven either one way or the other? Well, it's incredible naivety.
But Reform did have some sort of dubious characters, running for MPs and things like that. So there was some, and they had an issue with their vetting process. So that's right. She wouldn't be. I don't think she'd be out of place wanting to scrutinise them.
Yes. OK, I understand that aspect of the argument, but we're talking about demonstrable numbers, black or white. There's no shades of grey in numbers. It's either true or it's not true. And for her to dispute it and suggest that it's a big fraud from Reform, I just thought it was so naive, it was highly myopic, and it's backfired. And I tell you what, Reform are loving it, because 30,000 have joined since this.
But maybe she knows something we don't. Like, there might be some other information that is available to her that we don't know. It has been, I think it was Sky News and another organisation that verified that there wasn't anything funny at the back end. But, what do you think, Jonathan Liss?
I think that Kemi Badenoch is a total disaster for the Conservative Party. She has so much hubris and sort of pomposity, and she's deeply abrasive, but without any of the competence to back it up.
Who are you talking about? Is that
I'm talking about Kemi Badenoch. I think that Kemi Badenoch is the one thing that Labour can be grateful for, as it sort of caps off a really poor few months for them. Because if they had a competent leader of the opposition who actually was popular and was reaching out to sort of different wings of the party and the electorate, they'd be in real trouble. But Badenoch is not doing any of that. She shoots from the hip, she speaks out of turn, she sort of sets that banana skins on the pavement and then sort of slips over them all the time. I don't think that she'll be there for a very long time, maybe sort of a couple of years tops, then the Tories will get rid of her. And this is just a classic example of that. Just again, she knows best, she's shooting from the hip, she's accusing Farage of something that is demonstrably false. She'll be very lucky if she gets away without being sued by Farage, but either way she'll have to grovel and apologise, and it's a disastrous look for the party.
So, but to be fair, Kemi is a very competent politician, and even to get to lead the party, she has shown that she's quite a skillful politician. And I think it's a bit unfair for you to say that she's not really, that she's not really up for the job. I think and up against Keir Starmer, she should be doing better. Are you saying that the Labour Party is so bad that she should be doing better?
I'm saying that they are helped by the fact that she is so bad. the first few weeks of her leadership had been really poor. I think that that was partly because she was up against an even worse contender in Robert Jenrick, but she has not managed to rally the troops. She isn't speaking to the country. She isn't being honest and upfront about why the Conservatives lost the election, and that is definitely going to be to her cost. If I had to put money down, I would say that James Cleverly is the more likely leader of the Conservative Party going into the next election, and he was probably quite lucky, actually, to have missed out on the final two, because he gets to avoid this sort of disastrous period of in the wilderness.
That's really interesting, because I think there was some sort of complacent tactical voting with the Tory party members that meant that James Cleverly, I think maybe he felt overly confident, or the members felt that he was in the final two, and tactical voting, I think, cost him that. And I think Kemi Badenoch is a disaster for the Conservatives. I just think that she doesn't have that gravitas. I think that she shot herself in the foot. I can't believe how petty-minded she is to suggest that they're fraudsters and that they are making up these numbers. It's demonstrably either true or it's demonstrably untrue. Nigel Farage says he can demonstrate it's true. I think 4 independent bodies, maybe even media organisations, because there's no point GB News saying, we'll check him, Nigel, because everyone will say, you're marking your own homework, all of that sort of baloney. So we've said, GB News has said, look, or Nigel Farage has said, look, 4 independent people, Sky, you don't like us, Sky, but I don't care if you don't like us as a party. You can still check our homework. And they have suggested that what Farage is saying is true.
Do you think that what Mark Littlewood was alluding to is that if Reform UK and the Conservative parties, if they joined, that this is the only way that the sort of right could win the election?
It would be a hostile takeover, because you have a big poll out today, for example, in the Sunday Times, which suggests that the politics of Britain have been completely reordered. We live in uniquely volatile times, and that the Labour Party would still be top if an election were held tomorrow. I
don't think so. No.
I'm telling you what the poll says.
Said that they would lose 200
MPs. Yes, this is the same poll. The Labour is fractionally on top, but it's completely splintered. And so you have the right split between the Conservatives and Reform. But Reform is still way below the Conservatives in that particular poll. And I just don't see any scenario where Reform is a smaller party, but they get to choose the leader. If any sort of putative coalition between the Conservatives and Reform, that's not going to happen. So Farage, there is a very solid, rigid cap to his support. There is a ceiling. He is not going to win over the Tory Lib Dem waverers in the south and the west, the home counties.
But I think you're missing the point here. There are a lot of people who supported Labour, who would now support Reform. And I think there's a delusion that most Reform voters would come from the Conservative Party. I think that a lot of the Reform voters, will be coming from young people who will be able to vote in many years to come, and also from lots of Labour voters who are very dissatisfied with the Labour Party and would never vote Tory.
Yeah, I know lots of Labour, not lots, but I know a few Labour supporters who are going to vote for Nigel Farage and his party, and who have done in the recent election as well. We mustn't underestimate that Farage and Reform are the only party who say they are going to stop the dinghies. Keir Starmer's going to start putting doors through at 3 o'clock in the morning with international police. Where's that? He said he's going to smash the gangs. Since Christmas, I think we've had 1,500, 1,800. There's no doors getting put through that I can see around the UK with these international barons who are people smugglers. We're still getting lots of people coming over. Nigel Farage says he's got the answer. I still think we should have tried the Rwanda scheme. I thought that was terribly arrogant of Keir Starmer to say it's not going to work. How do you know it's not going to work without trying it?
He had every right to say he didn't believe in it.
How do you know it's not going to work?
He had every right to oppose it as a policy. It wasn't under any obligation to continue it.
That's not the point. He said it won't work. The arrogance of the guy. How do you know it won't work?
It wasn't just about not working. It was about the vast expense of it for what that might be gained. It was also the moral implications. Labour was fully Labour. Well, we've talked about this many times.
No,
it was a deeply inhuman policy of sort of because it's dumping people in another country without sort of like they might have perfectly legitimate claim for asylum, and it wasn't even about processing. It was about full-scale deportation. It was completely inhuman policy.
Jonathan, you are aware that this country cannot take everyone and anyone, and we do have to have some level where people will be sent somewhere else if we haven't got the room or capacity. You have seen
no one's talking about capacity.
Let me finish. You have seen the NHS is in a bit of a mess. You've seen the fact that we don't have enough resources for the people who live in this country. We see our own governments giving away money in terms of foreign aid and farmers in other countries, yet our own house is not in order. And that is because we're spending too much money on other people instead of in this country with the people. Look at the pensioners. Yeah, look at the pensioners, for goodness sake.
You won't believe how angry
some farmers.
You won't believe how angry some people are. Honestly, I keep saying this. I drive 96 miles from the Midlands to get here and 96 miles back. I promise you, 96 miles away, people are furious about the unfettered, unwanted, undocumented immigration. And you can label them racist. That word really holds no meaning much anymore, much as it did say 10 minutes ago, 10 minutes ago, since Jonathan first spoke. Honestly, you won't believe how angry people are. It's cross-party. Yeah. You got a problem with a dinghy, doesn't mean that you're Labour or you can be a Lib Dem and you got a problem with a dinghy.
And that's the problem here. But anyway, finally, so is Kemi Badenoch, do you think she's helpful?
No, I think she's the wrong person.
Yeah, and also you, Jonathan Liss.
No, she's rubbish.
That's not very nice. She's not that bad. Come on.
No, she is.
She's not rubbish. She's good at certain things, but maybe perhaps not leading the party. I'm going to close my mouth now and carry on. 31 minutes after 3 o'clock. This is GB News. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. Although she's not alone because many of the other leaders of certain parties are not that great either. But coming up, my great British debate this hour, I'm asking, is Sir Keir Starmer's approval rating as they continue to plummet? Does Labour need to ditch him as soon as possible? But first, let's get your latest news headlines with Sam Francis.
Very good afternoon to you. Just coming up to 32 minutes past 3. The top story. Foreign Secretary David Lammy has offered his heartfelt condolences to South Korea and to Thailand after a plane crash killed 179 people, including, sadly, a 3-year-old boy. The flight from Bangkok skidded off the runway, crashing into a wall and bursting into flames. Footage shows the Boeing jet landing without wheels after a warning for a bird strike delayed its approach. 2 crew members managed to survive, but the crash is South Korea's worst ever aviation disaster. The investigation into the cause of the crash is now underway, with a possible bird strike or poor weather cited as potential causes. The government says that ruthless criminals are responsible for the deaths of 3 migrants today after a small boat capsized in the English Channel. A major rescue operation this morning near Calais saved 45 others, with 4 in hospital for hypothermia. Authorities are also warning the death toll could continue to rise. It follows news that over 1,300 migrants have now crossed the Channel since Christmas Day, despite the government's promise to smash the gangs behind the crossings. Labour is facing a countryside crisis as new polling has revealed that rural voters are angry over a planned tax raid on family farms. A Telegraph poll suggests only 1 in 5 believe that Labour cares about the countryside. Sir Keir Starmer's approval ratings among rural voters are being described as catastrophic, with concerns mounting over his so-called family farm tax. The Prime Minister's also under pressure to address the backlash in his major speech on his plan for change. And heavy fog is wreaking havoc on travel plans ahead of New Year's Eve. Gatwick airports facing significant delays, with Heathrow, Stansted, Luton and Manchester airports also disrupted. Air traffic controllers are warning restrictions will stay in place as the fog continues to linger across major airfields. Travellers are also being advised to check with airlines before heading to the airport. Those are the latest headlines for now. A full roundup from the newsroom at 4 o'clock, and Nana will be with you after this break.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Hello there, welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. Well, as we move into 2025, the weather is certainly turning much more unsettled across the country. A risk of some disruption in places as areas of low pressure move in. But at the moment, we still have high pressure across the south, keeping things fairly settled here. But weather fronts already providing plenty of rain across Scotland. And if anything, as we go through the course of the evening, that rain intensifies across parts of Scotland. Also, could just see some snow beginning to fall across the higher ground. Further south, a fairly quiet night to come, albeit rather cloudy, but that cloud cover will generally give us a fairly mild night. Although some clearer skies across the very far south, we could see lows here of around 3 to 5 degrees. So if we start Monday morning across Scotland, it's going to be a wet and potentially snowy start for some of us. Warnings are in force right throughout Monday, and that will continue into New Year's Eve and potentially New Year's Day too. So if you do have any Hogmanay travel plans, do stay up to date with the latest warnings. The rain also beginning to move into parts of Northern Ireland and Northern England too, but The further south you are, generally a dry start with maybe a few glimmers of sunshine. But for most of us, really, it's going to be a fairly cloudy Monday. The best of any brightness really will be reserved across the far south. But even here, we could just see a few showers develop. But for Scotland especially, a very wet picture here, although the far northwest may well just turn a little bit drier as we move into the afternoon. Mild for most of us, but up across the far north, we're just starting to see this cold air just begin to move a bit further south. So a pretty cold afternoon to come for much of northern Scotland. Into the evening, another band of rain then begins to move into Scotland, so turning wet once again with, again, risk of some snow in places. Remaining fairly quiet for the time being across the south, but for all of us, as we move into 2025, it's turning unsettled with the risk of some wind, rain and potentially snow.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more. Whether it's breaking royal news, Will, please bring us up to date. Or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons.
Very, very curious.
We bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial. And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, 37 minutes after 3 o'clock. This is GB News. We are Britain's news channel. Don't forget you can stream the show live on YouTube. I'm Nana Akua. Welcome. It's time now for the second great British debate this hour. And I'm asking, does Labour need to ditch Sir Keir Starmer? New polling shows his approval ratings have plummeted and he could lose up to 200 seats in a general election. So what do you think? Is it time for Sir Keir Starmer to be ditched? Well, joining me to discuss, journalist and political commentator Jonathan Liss, also broadcaster and journalist Danny Kelly. All right, I'm going to start with you. Jonathan Liss, is it time? He needs to go, doesn't he?
Well, I think it's a little bit uncharitable to be having this discussion just 2 days after his brother died, and he's obviously in a state of bereavement right now. So I think we need to be a little bit generous to the Prime Minister.
Well, hold on a second. No, sorry. You know, that's very, very sad, and we are very sorry about that. But he's also the leader of the country. So whilst it's very tragic news, it has nothing to do with the debate now. So.
No. Well, I think that I wouldn't necessarily be calling for, even if I thought that he should resign, I'd probably give him a week before calling for it again. But as that happens, I don't think he should resign, Nana. I think that, obviously, and I've said this to you many times, that Labour has had a difficult few months in office and it has made a lot of unforced errors. Some things have happened to it, events have happened outside its control, such as the riots, but it has also made massive errors like the winter fuel payment card,
OK, well, let's start with the riots. They were out of its control. It wasn't... nobody can blame anyone, really, for those, apart from the people that were rioting themselves. But then he did let out a load of prisoners earlier.
And whose fault was that?
Well, that was partly his for letting those particular prisoners out. Perhaps he could have sent some of them to more open prisons, Category D, where they could have assimilated into society more easily, because we know there are over 1,000 places left in those. So I'd say that would be his.
Well, look, obviously when Labour came in, there was a huge prisons crisis. We were a couple of days from being literally full in the prison, so the government had to. With
people from hurty words and.
Well, that's not to do with the government. The government didn't sentence anyone to jail.
Well, yeah, but he should. But listen, he made sure he will crack down on those people. He made it clear that he's not going to let this go unpunished. But he does have a role to play in this.
Of course, the government can direct the Ministry of Justice and the courts. Of course, I'm not saying that it has no role at all. Ultimately, it is the courts that will decide on sentences, and Labour didn't change any kind of sentencing guidelines before those people were sentenced. There was obviously an expedited process for a lot of those people, which you could argue was necessary given the urgency of what was what's happening. But yes, I think that the criminal justice does need a general review, and I think that you've got David Gauke, the former Tory Justice Minister, who's now looking into that, and I'm going to be interested to see what he says. I think that he's already said that we should be imprisoning fewer people, which I agree with, and then building new prisons is not necessarily the answer. I think that's probably true as well, and that we do need to look at sort of different measures, such as keeping people under sort of maybe house arrest a bit more, or moving to open prisons, much more focus on rehabilitation, education. You know, I'm all in favour of having a big debate about how we sentence people. I think that's not one of the areas in which Labour has failed. I think that the biggest failure has been communications, apart from those policy decisions that we talked about.
Which ones?
Such as the winter fuel payment cut, I think, is a big one.
The farmers?
I think that, look, in my view, there was a very legitimate case for closing that particular tax loophole. I feel bad for the people who are going to be caught out by it. I think that maybe the threshold could have been a little bit higher, but I don't think it was bad for the government to close that loophole.
Well, I think even Labour's own accountant suggested if they were going to do this, it should be 20 million, not just 1 and then 3.
So
Danny.
The question is should he go, or should there be a...
Well, should the party ditch him now? Because he's very, very unpopular.
He's incredibly unpopular. The guy is loathed. I mentioned earlier that I know of ex-Labour voters who now are going to vote for reform and who did vote for reform. The guy is associated, whether you like it or not, he is inextricably associated by labelling, the summer riots, by labelling everybody who's got a problem with the lads coming over on boats as far right. Listen, they were rioting in Southport, they were rioting in Liverpool. I can tell you, I'm a Scouser. If you've got a problem with undocumented males coming over, living in your area, and your area changing beyond all recognition, and that manifests itself inexcusably into violence, you're not going to be a right-winger in Liverpool if you've got a problem with undocumented lads. You're going to be a Labour supporter. And what he said was that he just sort of distanced his party from any of this violence by labelling people unreasonably as far-right. He's inextricably linked to that. So he's also inextricably linked... And Jonathan's right, there was no pressure, no government pressure on the judiciary to start throwing heavy sentences.
There was a little bit, yeah.
Well, I don't know of any documented evidence that came from the Home Office saying, listen, really give these lads and women heavy sentences for writing things on Facebook.
But you would think, OK, so the prisons got full with some people who did things that weren't quite right but could have been punished.
Oh, I think people
and then prisons were emptied.
I was staggered by the sentences for what people had written on Facebook. I was staggered by them, and I'm staggered that they got sentences, and I'm staggered that they weren't more like sort of well, no, you could have suspended sentences. So you could say, OK, instead of 3 years behind bars, we'll give you an 18-month suspended. Do something stupid in 18 months or criminal, then we're going to lock you up. I'm amazed there weren't suspended sentences.
There could have been some sort of punishments, as in community service and things like that, which would have been far better than doing this, or making people clean up after the riots, or making people do things that would actually affect them kind of physically so they could connect with what their actions had actually done.
But Jonathan raised an interesting point earlier on. You know, we're 6 months into this government and we've got potentially another 4 years and 6 months of this government. Why would the Labour Party, who have such an overwhelming majority in the House of Commons, get rid of him? Yes, he's got the personality of a cold-plated blancmange. He's not got an abundance. He's not got an abundance of charisma. Love or hate Boris Johnson, people voted for him sometimes because of his charisma, his personality. He is the complete antithesis of that. But it's far too early, in my opinion, to call for it. Well, who's going to replace him? The Ginger... What's her nickname? The Ginger Growler or something?
Well, she calls herself that, so we'll...
Who's going to replace... Look at the face on Jonathan.
I don't know.
Who's going to replace him?
I think that potentially, and I'm not necessarily a fan, but Wes Streeting, I think, is probably a better...
Heaven help us, my God.
No, but I'm not saying... I'm picking from, a mouldy tray. I'm not choosing...
That's right.
It's not... You know what I mean?
It's like a Boxing Day buffet.
It's like
a mouldy tray.
Well, I'm just saying that I don't think any of them are any good. So if you ask me to pick one to replace something that's not great, I'll try and pick something that I think is slightly better. But I have to be honest, I don't think I'm disappointed with what's happened. I suggested if there was going to be somebody, potentially he may be better than Keir Starmer.
Is he the Norwich MP, the Norfolk MP?
He's got charisma, hasn't he? That's the one thing.
He's the Health Secretary.
He's the Health...
Yeah, but where's his constituency?
Ilford.
OK, it's a different guy. OK.
Well, anyway, what do you think? gbnews.com/your-saner. Just a reminder, you can join GB News for the ultimate countdown to 2025. Bev, Patrick, Emily, Ben and Darren will all be together for a very special show. GB News' New Year's Eve live show from 10 p.m. on New Year's Eve. Don't miss it. Right, but if you're in search of some winter sun, here is the forecast for some of the top European holiday destinations.
Ready to soak up that holiday sunshine?
Won't we need some cover?
No worries. All sorted.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
Hello there, welcome to your latest winter sun forecast. Well, as we see out 2024, it's going to remain fairly unsettled for parts of Cyprus and Greece. This area of cloud and rain continues to linger here. But for much of Italy, Spain and Portugal, a fairly quiet couple of days with some late winter sunshine here. A few showers for Madeira, maybe just creeping into Canaries. But as we approach New Year's Day itself, it should be fairly fine and dry across the Canaries.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
Well, stay with me. It's just coming up to 46 minutes after 3 o'clock. Coming up after the break, I'll be joined by Uri Geller for Worldview. And we ask, why have the Houthis not been banned as a terrorist group here in the UK, even though they are considered that in the US? This is GB News.
I'm Christopher Hope. This is GB News, Britain's election channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Now we're joined now by Sophia Viraji, the co-founder of the Azaylia Foundation, which was created due to the tragic passing of her 8-month-old daughter to leukemia. The foundation is doing some incredible work for children's cancer.
Yeah, some really incredible stuff. They've just launched a PhD even where they're funding young doctors to specialise in childhood cancer as, get this, I wasn't aware of this, it's one of the most underfunded areas in the NHS. So not many sectors choose to go down that route, unfortunately. The charity, the foundation, have donated over £1 million worth of equipment to hospitals as well, and we're delighted to welcome Sophia. You've turned a tragedy and grief into triumph, I guess, and something so inspiring. Just tell us about that. Do you recognise that in yourself and the work you're doing?
Yeah, I'm here to always honour my daughter and to always continue her name, her legacy, and to support all of these other children fighting against childhood cancer.
It was all over social media. I mean, you were at one point probably one of the most famous families in this country because of Azaylia and Azaylia's fight. When you look back now at that time, does it give you comfort that you had so many people behind you?
Absolutely. The community that we have got, the humanity that we've seen in the UK and all around the world, in fact, has really touched my heart. And that kindness, love and support has always been the backbone of carrying me through this, to give me hope, to give me belief. And it still inspires me and encourages me till today to continue to do that, to show that light, to show that courage and bravery.
GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is the nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon. If you just tuned in, where have you been? No, it's fine. It's fine. You're here now. That's the main thing. This is GB News. It's just coming up to 49 minutes after 3 o'clock. I'm Nana Akua. Welcome. But first, let's cross over to the Middle East now to have a chat with Mr. and performer Uri Geller, who joins us live. Uri, welcome to the programme. What's on your mind?
Okay, hi, Nana. Things are really hotting up here again in the Middle East. And I'm going to tell you and your viewers why you in Britain should care. So Israel has crushed Hamas. We have crushed Hezbollah, but we're still getting attacked by missiles from Yemen. I and my family get woken up in the middle of the night, and we have seconds, only seconds, to get to a safe room. Last week, a ballistic missile landed here in Jaffa in a children's playground just a couple of miles from where I'm standing now. This is the daily experience of millions of Israelis. Can you imagine, Nana, what it's like for children, for mothers with babies, for sick people? But here is the thing. They're being fired by terrorists in Yemen. These are the Houthis, and they're controlled by Iran. Now, people in Britain might not care that much. Let's face it, Nana. Most people don't even know where Yemen is. But Britain is going to pay the price. Your grocery bills is going up because the Houthis are also attacking shipping in the Red Sea. British businesses are already suffering. Exporters are now avoiding the Red Sea, which is hitting British manufacturers. And look at this. Holidays for Brits are going to get a lot more expensive because all these rising costs are going to be passed on to airlines and cruises. So suddenly the Houthis become a lot more relevant to your viewers. But here's the crazy thing. Like you said before, this is unbelievable. The British government refuses to class the Houthis as a terrorist group. By the way, the Houthis' official slogan, listen to this, death to America, death to Israel, curse upon the Jews. So the Houthis support Hamas. They fire missiles and drones at Israel, and they attack international shipping. That's devastating. But the UK government will not designate them as terrorists. This means that you can legally raise money for the Houthis in Britain. It means you can march down Oxford Street, celebrating them if you want, and you can fly Houthi flags. Look, Nana, this is ludicrous, and it is disgusting. So I want GB News viewers to start a campaign calling on Keir Starmer to ban the Houthis. Let's start with your program, Nana. Please ask your viewers what they think. Should Britain ban the Houthis? And this is now over to you. Lots of love from the Holy Land, and wishing all of your viewers a very happy new year. I love you all.
Thank you so much. That's the brilliant Uri Geller. Those are his thoughts on the Houthis, who are basically robbing us all blind in the shipping and everything. Uri, take care of yourself. Lovely to talk to you.
Thank you.
Really good to talk to Uri Geller there. But I was going to say, who needs the Houthis? You've got the Labour Party robbing us blind anyway. But what do you think? gbnews.com/your say. Lots of you who have been getting in touch. Dawn says that I'll only watch the New Year's Eve show on Farage TV if they all have a go at certain people. I won't read the rest of that. You know I won't read that one. We've got Les here saying, like picking from a mouldy tray, says Nana. What a great analogy. It really sums up the useless Labour government. I think it's pretty much all of them. A lot of them, and the Conservatives, I think, are on that tray as well. Janet says, I'm far right. I'm far right because I don't want illegal, undocumented men breaking into our country and roaming around as they have nothing else to do, some taking pictures outside schools here. And I can verify that sort of thing has been going on. We have reports of that sort of thing going on as well. Grumpy Grandad says, when Starmer found out 4,000 people could die if he stopped the winter fuel payment and he still decided to go ahead with it, that one thing alone told me Starmer has to go. He isn't putting the people he's supposed to serve first, far from it. What do you think? gbnews.com/your say. I'd love to hear what you think about all the issues that we're discussing. Keep all your thoughts coming. Guy says, Jonathan, this is to Jonathan, I'll let him know when he comes in. When Boris was PM, he lost his mother, and I didn't see any sympathy towards him then, so why should Starmer get any? And also, Boris almost died during COVID, and there certainly wasn't any sympathy for him then either. Thank you for that. Keep them coming. But next up, my niggle. Has 2024 been a year to remember or forget? But now, let's get an update with your weather.
Heavy showers first thing will be followed by a warm, cosy day. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. Well, as we move into 2025, the weather is certainly turning much more unsettled across the country. A risk of some disruption in places as areas of low pressure move in. But at the moment, we still have high pressure across the south, keeping things fairly settled here. But weather fronts already providing plenty of rain across Scotland. And if anything, as we go through the course of the evening, that rain intensifies across parts of Scotland. Also, could just see some snow beginning to fall across the higher ground. Further south, a fairly quiet night to come, albeit rather cloudy, but that cloud cover will generally give us a fairly mild night. Although some clearer skies across the very far south, we could see lows here of around 3 to 5 degrees. So if we start Monday morning across Scotland, it's going to be a wet and potentially snowy start for some of us. Warnings are in force right throughout Monday, and that will continue into New Year's Eve and potentially New Year's Day too. So if you do have any Hogmanay travel plans, do stay up to date with the latest warnings. The rain also beginning to move into parts of Northern Ireland and Northern England too, but the further south you are, generally a dry start with maybe a few glimmers of sunshine. But for most of us, really, it's going to be a fairly cloudy Monday. The best of any brightness really will be reserved across the far south. But even here, we could just see a few showers develop. But for Scotland especially, a very wet picture here, although the far northwest may well just turn a little bit drier as we move into the afternoon. Mild for most of us, but up across the far north, we're just starting to see this cold air just begin to move a bit further south. So a pretty cold afternoon to come for much of northern Scotland. Into the evening, another band of rain then begins to move into Scotland, so turning wet once again with, again, risk of some snow in places. Remaining fairly quiet for the time being across the south, but for all of us, as we move into 2025, it's turning unsettled with the risk of some wind, rain and potentially snow.
Expect a warm front, moving from the kitchen right through to the rest of the house. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
There's still plenty of time to grab your chance to win our biggest cash prize ever, an incredible £50,000. What would you spend £50,000 on in the coming year? Spectacular holidays, a brand new car, home improvements, or maybe you'd just like to save it for a special occasion? For another chance to win, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. You can call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB10 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 31st of January. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
Bansky's Girl with Balloon is arguably one of the artist's most recognisable images. So when a limited edition print signed by the artist was stolen from Grove Gallery in London, an investigation was launched by the Metropolitan Police's flying squad. The work was thankfully retrieved. The desire to own great works of art has once again become evident this week, albeit a little further afield on the continent. Police in Italy have uncovered a criminal network forging artworks by Bansky, Andy Warhol, Pablo Picasso and others. Investigators said that they've seized more than 2,100 fake pieces of art with a potential market value of about £165 million. With me to discuss that case is the Chief Executive of Grove Gallery, James Ryan.
The art world needs to tighten up. It is known as a bit of a Wild West out there because people will try and chance it with these forgeries. You're quite right, there's only one actual original, but even auction houses have been hoodwinked before.
The burglary that you suffered is sub judice, so we have to be careful what we say about it. But it must have been a bit of a shock to you. I mean, was it a broken window, a smashed door?
At 10, 11 o'clock at night, and just hammer straight through, shoulder barging through the door, and then in and out. You know, gone in 60 seconds. I must say, I know.
Obviously, that a targeted attack. The person would have known what he or she was after. Yeah.
Absolutely. But I must say, I know they cop a lot of flack, the police force, but the flying squad got got the artwork back within 3 days. They were fantastic. So yeah, I've never heard or seen, other than the Thomas Crown Affair type film, you know, I just didn't think it'd be happening to little old me, you know, in Fitzrovia, but it did, and thankfully we got it back.
GB News.
Hello, welcome to GB News. Merry Christmas to you. We are live on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. And for the next few hours, me and my panel will be taking on some of the big topics hitting the headlines right now. This show is all about opinion. It's mine, it's theirs, and of course it's yours. We'll be debating, discussing, and at times we will disagree, but no one will be cancelled. So joining me for the next few hours, journalist and political commentator Jonathan Liss, and also broadcaster and journalist Danny Kelly. Coming up in the Great British Debate, I'm asking, is Rachel Reeves out of her depth as Chancellor? And over in the US, are the cracks beginning to show on the MAGA movement? And then, of course, in a few moments' time, in my niggle, I'll be taking a look at some of the political memorable moments of 2024.
We are seeing the biggest landslide, the biggest majority for a Labour Party since Tony Blair's in 1997.
But before we get started, let's get your latest news with Sam Francis.
Nana, thank you very much. Good afternoon to you. It's just after 4 o'clock. Well, the top story this afternoon. The King has, in the last few minutes, paid tribute to the victims of a devastating plane crash in South Korea that sadly killed 179 people, including the youngest victim, a 3-year-old boy. King Charles described the loss as profoundly saddening, offering prayers for victims' families and loved ones. Footage showed the Boeing jet landing without wheels before skidding off the runway, crashing into a wall and then bursting into flames. 2 crew members were pulled to safety and remain conscious, according to local officials. An investigation is now underway, with bird strikes or poor weather being explored as potential causes of the crash. Well, the travel and aviation expert Sally Gethin has been speaking to us here on GB News about the events that led to that crash.
Seems to have suffered a catastrophic bird strike, which might sound nothing in the scheme of things, but actually, when you consider the powerful engines on board, any bird strike is very critical in a case like this. And that triggered a chain of events where the pilots could not keep in control. They could not deploy the landing gear in time. And then they ran out of runway effectively at that point. They skidded off the runway and they ran right into a wall. They have recovered one of the black boxes. Once they've recovered both black boxes, the investigation will begin properly.
Sally Gethin there speaking to us earlier. In other news, the government says ruthless criminals are responsible for the deaths of 3 migrants after a small boat capsized in the English Channel. A major rescue operation this morning near Calais managed to save 45 people, with 4 still in hospital for hypothermia, and authorities warning the death toll could still rise. It follows news that over 1,300 migrants have now crossed the Channel since Christmas Day, despite the government's promise to smash the gangs behind those crossings. 7 people have been arrested after an 18-year-old man was fatally stabbed in Derbyshire on Saturday night. Police found the victim on Rose Avenue, but despite the best efforts of emergency services, he died nearby. Among those arrested are 4 17-year-old boys on suspicion of murder, while the others are accused of helping an offender. Detectives are treating the case as isolated and are now appealing for CCTV and dashcam footage from the area to help their investigation. The Education Secretary says that tax breaks for private schools are a luxury we can't afford ahead of a new policy coming into effect. Bridget Phillipson has defended the plan to end exemptions on private schools, claiming it will raise £1.8 billion a year to fund state schools and recruit more teachers. Critics, though, including the Conservatives, say it's a vindictive policy that will only hurt children's education. But the government insists the policy is supported by middle-class parents who are struggling with private school fees and believe that better funding for state schools will improve life chances for everyone. Labour is facing a countryside crisis as new polling has revealed that rural voters are angry over a planned tax rate on family farms. A poll in the Telegraph newspaper suggests that only 1 in 5 people believe that Labour cares about countryside communities. Sir Keir Starmer's approval ratings among rural voters are being described as catastrophic, with concerns mounting over his so-called family farm tax. The Prime Minister's also under pressure to address the backlash after a major speech on his plan for change. And wet winter weather is looming as the UK braces for rain, snow and 70-mile-an-hour winds this New Year's Eve and New Year's Day. Yellow weather warnings cover Northern Ireland, Northern England and Scotland from Monday, extending nationwide by Wednesday. Heavy rain could also bring flooding to Wales and Western Scotland, while northern areas face up to 10 centimetres of snow and blizzards too. Travel disruption is expected across the UK, with forecasters urging people to check updates before heading out, and there's even Arctic air expected to sweep across the country on Thursday, bringing a widespread frost and icy conditions. Those are the latest headlines for now. Your next update in around half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Good afternoon. It's fast approaching 6 minutes after 4 o'clock. This is GB News. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. What a year it's been. It started with the diagnosis of cancer for the King and the Princess of Wales. Meghan Markle was busy making jam. Rishi Sunak, remember him? He announced an election for July the 4th and all hell broke loose. Nigel was out and then in.
We will now be targeting Labour votes. We're coming for Labour, be in no doubt about that.
The Reform Party came alive. We all knew that the Tories were dead in the water. The question was, by what margin?
We are seeing the biggest landslide, the biggest majority for a Labour Party since Tony Blair's in 1997.
The Labour Party formed the new government.
Change begins now. And it feels good, I have to be honest.
And that was that. Now, I'm prepared to support any elected government of the day because that's democracy. Even if only a fraction of the electorate voted, it's your own fault if you don't get what you want, if you haven't exercised your voting rights. But this current government, in my view, have been a complete and utter disaster. The riots, which were not its fault but aggravated by it when all protesters were termed far right. Keir was swift on the uptake, which was, whilst most agree sentences for hurty words were a bit harsh, we had hoped that perhaps this swift justice would be an indication that punishment for crimes would be dealt with in a speedier manner. But instead, the jails were emptied earlier and prisoners were thanking Labour.
Happy to be out today? I'm happy to be out. Are you grateful to Keir Starmer for this release scheme?
No. Keir Starmer, I am. I'm a big Labour.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I'll be holding in with the new. It's been too long anyway, I think. Yeah. Everyone's been happy today. I'm sure coming out there, haven't they? There's been a lot of happy people faces in the house, that's for sure.
Yeah. So you're grateful to Labour and you're grateful for the...
100%. Yeah. I'm vote Labour all my life.
Yeah.
Labour's the one.
Since then, we've had Freebie-gate.
A Labour MP for South Shields, Emma Buck, gives her freebies to charity. He gives them away. Why won't you give things you've had for free back to charity or to a good cause?
Well, all that happened is I wanted somewhere safe and quiet for my son to do his GCSE preparation. I needed it to be secure because of the situation we were in. No exchange of money. There's nothing to give away.
Rogue landlord and Labour MP Jazz Athwell being let off the hook after allowing his properties to become mould and flea infested and failing to pay licences under a scheme that he implemented. Absolutely shocking. Louise Hay kicked out of the cabinet for being a lawbreaker and a hypocrite. Policies that were not on their manifesto, like stripping the winter fuel allowance from pensioners, the waspy woman who they claimed they would help.
Here with the 5 towns and Yorkshire waspy women. They've been running a great campaign on behalf of women right across this area but across the country as well. They've been so badly treated by this Tory government.
We said we'll right that injustice, and within the 5 years of the Labour government we will compensate them for the money that they've lost. This is their money that they've had stolen off them, and it's completely unacceptable.
And the simple fact of the matter is, in the current economic circumstances, the taxpayer can't bear the burden of tens of billions of pounds in compensation. Well, they're chuntering away. In 14 years, they accelerated the changes and not once spoke about compensation.
Talk about flip-flop. The farmers who they've crushed going back on a promise.
This is a fair deal for farmers, whilst also ensuring that we bring in the money to get our public finances back on a firm footing.
And basically every working person they promised not to tax. Even the TUC General Secretary Paul Nowak is questioning their policies out loud. He said, "I'm worried about the impact of that on small farmers." He told The Independent, this is about the tractor tax. "I know that for some small employers, national insurance contributions will also be a worry next year, particularly for those companies operating on small profit margins." And with their own councillors turning against them and the prospect of a rise of about £8,000 for average households in the new year, we're in for a bumpy 2025. The question is, will Sir Keir Starmer still be at the helm? So before we get stuck into the debate, here's what else is coming up today. In my niggle, I've been looking back at Sir Keir Starmer's record over the past 6 months and some of the poignant moments in politics. Coming up, though, the Great British Debate this hour. And I'm asking, as families may be hit by an £8 billion tax raid in the new year, is Rachel Reeves out of her depth? And, of course, in the VAT raid on private schools, is that the right policy? Is it the policy of envy? And now we'll be talking to Paul Dudridge and asking with regard to the United States, is Elon Musk about to be even more powerful? That's coming up. As ever, send me your thoughts, post your comments, gbnews.com/your say. But joining me now is journalist and political commentator Jonathan Liss and also broadcaster and journalist Danny Kelly. Right, I'm going to start with you. Jonathan Liss, what do you think?
About the year that's just been?
Yes, about the year that's been. I mean, there was a brief moment where I discussed Rishi Sunak, but, but then there's a lot more that has happened under the Labour government.
Well, I think that it was a year of two halves, as I say, and
one was an ascending half with interest rates.
So I think the Conservatives got what they deserved. I think the country was very happy to see the back of them. I don't detect a lot of buyer's remorse in what's happened, or rather seller's remorse, if you like. You might hear a lot of people being disappointed with the Labour government. I get that, but I haven't heard anyone saying, "Oh, we shouldn't have got rid of the Conservatives." So that's dangerous, the Conservatives, because even though people are complaining about the other side, they're certainly not sort of angling for any return of the Tories. So we are in kind of political stalemate territory right now, kind of a plague on all your houses. Now, even the Reform Party, which we were talking about a little while ago, even in the very enthusiastic poll, or it's a generous poll, you might say, I think they were projected to maybe win 80 seats. And this is not a party on the current projections that is about to enter government. Maybe there will be some kind of deal between the Conservatives and Reform. We just don't know what the situation, the landscape is going to be looking like in 4 years' time. But yes, I think it's been a disappointing start in many ways from the Labour government. I think that they have committed unforced errors. Partly that's inexperience, partly it's complacency, partly it's bad communications, a bit of all the above. I do think they've done good things as well, which they haven't been able to, such as Great British Energy, such as increasing workers' rights.
Do you know how many people work for Great British Energy?
Well, obviously these things take a lot of time.
15,
these things take time. I think the renationalising the railways, I think that's a very popular policy around the country. There have been things that have been wrong as well, and that clearly we talk a lot about those things on GB News, but has not been the full-scale car crash that some people on the right are painting.
You don't think so?
No, I don't.
All right, Danny Kelly, has it been a full-scale car crash with the Labour Party?
Well, it certainly hasn't been a year of two halves. I've never heard that expression once. It was a game of two halves.
That was the joke, wasn't it?
Oh, sorry. I think it went over my head then.
He was being funny now.
I see. Sarcastic. I've worked with Jonathan a number of times. Sarcasm wasn't the top of his comedic list, and I fell for it. So, look, has it been a game of two halves, a year or two? Well, yes. I mean, I know of people, Jonathan alluded to the fact that he doesn't know of anyone who regrets not having a Tory government. That may say more about the circle of friends that you have than a general consensus for the national interest. But I know of people who deeply regret not having a Conservative government. They're going to reform. It was a great montage that you put up. Great montage. Yeah, I loved it. You know, you had the drowning rat, you had Rishi Sunak. I mean, who advised him? Who advised him to go out into
That's the meanest thing I've ever...
Who advised him to go out into a monsoon without any sort of... Yeah, it was crazy. But then if he had an umbrella, he'd be mocked for that. He wouldn't have been mocked for that.
It's like they literally spent millions of pounds on an indoor press conference room. They could have done it there quite easily.
You're right. That's right. The legacy of COVID, of course, you could have just done it indoors. Reform, I think, are going to be the big news of 2025. I really do. I think that they are gaining a hell of a lot of support. The summer riots will be something that people will always remember. And, yeah, so going back to Keir Starmer, will he be in power? I think he's going to be in power for the next 4 years. I really do.
Do you think?
I do. I think, but don't underestimate reform. Underestimate them at your peril. They are getting votes from the left and the right.
For reform and even the Tory party, then maybe Keir Starmer is good to be at the helm because
I think
because he's so unpopular.
Yeah, that's
that actually you're better off having an unpopular leader than someone who's very popular that you've got to fight.
Look, no, all I would say is that a week is a long time in politics, as the cliche goes. 4.5 years is an eternity. If you'd had this conversation shortly after the 2019 election, literally nobody would have predicted Keir Starmer being Prime Minister 5 years later. So a lot of things can happen. We just don't know what's going to happen. Things can go wrong for the Labour Party. I'm sure they will. Maybe things will get better as well.
They can continue to go wrong.
We just don't know what's going to happen. Look, governments tend not to get more popular, but then actually Boris Johnson became wildly popular in 2020. Obviously, that was partly because of the pandemic. And
personality politics. We mentioned this earlier.
And then obviously, he was actually the agent of his own downfall. So Partygate was entirely a self-inflicted wound. And so Owen Paterson, that's when the rot set in, and there was no coming back. And obviously Liz Truss, the disaster, we all know how that ended.
Well, to be honest, I can't say that Rachel Reeves is doing much better. It might be a long, drawn-out process, but the economy is collapsing before her very eyes. What about this one? Richard says this to you, Liz, Jonathan. He says, Liz forgot two reasons why Labour have gone wrong: jealousy and envy.
Well, they're quite similar, aren't they? That's one reason, isn't it?
Well, not really.
Well,
he said jealousy and envy. You can be jealous and then envious. These are two separate words.
All right. Well, the politics, in terms of, who are they jealous of then?
Well, that's what I haven't got the answers from Richard. I can't answer.
Well,
Richard, if you want to message in,
there's a common argument about the politics of envy, which you do hear sometimes, and I suppose that relates to the private school issue. I don't think that is what's motivated it. I think that it's just trying to have a slightly fairer system. It's not saying that private schools can't exist. It's just saying that they shouldn't be entitled to a tax break, which is what they effectively had before. That's all it is. That money's going to be pumped into state education.
OK, so to be clear, it's not actually a tax break, so technically it's not a tax break. All that is happening there is education is not charged VAT, and that's why they don't have VAT on education. It's quite simple. There's no tax break, and the people who are paying for their kids to go to private school also pay into their taxes to pay for others to go to schools that they don't send their kids to. So in effect, they're paying twice. There's no tax break, and technically it isn't a tax break.
I think the VAT thing was ideologically driven. Keir Starmer said he's a socialist. This is typical socialism. You've got the proletariat, the working class, you've got the bourgeoisie, the myth of the bourgeoisie, all wealthy enough to send their kids to school, some of whom are driving around in battered old cars. They deny themselves the summer holiday because they want to make sure the kids go to this private school. So I think it is ideologically driven.
All right, well,
I wish he was a socialist.
Well, listen, we'll move on because we've got another debate to get through. So if you want to join us, gbnews.com/your say. We are GB News. We are Britain's news channel. I'm Nana Akua. Coming up in our first great British debate this hour, I'm asking, is Rachel Reeves out of her depth as Chancellor?
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/your say. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
her name is synonymous with fashion. Karen Millen, the high street designer whose dresses have been worn by some of the world's most famous women, including the Princess of Wales.
Yes, but in a recent Daily Mail interview conducted by our showbiz juggernaut, as I call her, Steph Tetchy, 63-year-old Karen confessed she isn't immune from worries about her appearance.
Well, this summer, Karen took the plunge with a £35,000 facelift using the very latest surgical techniques. Now, to hear more of her story, we're delighted to be joined by Karen herself and consultant plastic surgeon Dr. Tunç Tiryaki, co-founder of the London Regenerative Institute. So, how did you two get together?
That was a meeting at the Parliament, wasn't it?
It was, actually, yeah, through mutual friends, really.
So you already knew of Tunç and you knew his expertise. How did you come to the decision to kind of go ahead with this? I was reading the Mail article and apparently one day you looked in the mirror. And I've heard this story so many times before,
yeah, I know,
from not least my mum and my nan,
yeah.
and they said they looked in the mirror and thought, goodness me.
I know. I think it's that menopausal thing when suddenly things just change. And, yeah, for me, it was coming out of lockdown almost, where I was probably on the back end of menopause, and I just, like, suddenly looked in the mirror and it was like, oh, my God, what's happened to me?
Because I guess I mean, for me, I'm 35, I still feel like a 20-year-old or even an 18-year-old. Does that change as you get into sort of your...
Unfortunately not, right?
Well, it does change to a certain extent, but, you know, I've always looked after myself, so I've always kept fit and looked after my skin. So, you know, it did come as a bit of a shock. I mean, I know, obviously, ageing happens to us all and we have to embrace that, but there's a certain amount that we have to put up with and then, you know, other things can step in.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get the book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
21 minutes after 4 o'clock. This is GB News. We are Britain's news channel. I'm Nana Akua. Welcome if you've just tuned in. Where have you been? Yeah? You've missed almost an hour and a half. But at least you're here now. It's time for the first Great British Debate this out. And I'm asking, is Rachel Reeves out of her depth? They're saying I'm like a pub doorman. I actually used to be a bouncer.
I really did you? I can believe that. I can believe that. I'd be terrified. I'd be terrified. I wouldn't even try to get in.
That's right.
I would lash people with my tongue, with my words.
I bet you would.
That would scare them off. But it's time now for the Great British Debate. I'm asking, is Rachel Reeves out of her depth? Families could be hit with an £8 billion tax raid in the new year. Pensioners are freezing and farmers are furious. There's lots of things going on. A middle-class family with one child attending a private school would be hit by an extra £7,730 of taxation. Other things, we've got ongoing other taxes that have been included. And let's not forget the idea that they were potentially going to remove the single person's council tax discount. We don't know whether that's happening. So what do you think? For the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, is Rachel Reeves simply out of her depth, especially the NI hike? Lots of things to talk about. So joining me now, you saw them earlier, political commentator Jonathan Liss, also broadcaster and journalist Danny Kelly. Danny Kelly. We could talk about different things. So we kick off with
Is she out of her depth?
Is she out of her depth? Look, the National Insurance rise, for example. She did a long speech in the House of Commons explaining in 2019 what damage this would do to business and how it would stunt and growth. It was both a tax on the employer and the employee.
Which it is.
She said that for national insurance, so there's no division, and yet she's gone and done it exactly that.
The foundations of all of these policies, and we're going to hear it, and it's a fair thing for Jonathan to introduce, is this black hole of £22 billion. Because when she said this back in 2019 or 20 or whatever, 2019, there wasn't this £22 billion. Now, as I understand, the Labour government could have had foresight of this £22 billion. The impression I get is that they literally, Keir Starmer was handed the keys to number 10, and then all of us, oh my God, there's a £22 billion gaping. Where the hell did this come from? But I understand, it's my understanding that they may have known about this. Now, if they did have some sort of knowledge about this, I think it's scandalous that they put out a manifesto knowing on day one they discover this £22 billion black hole and then take the pensioners £300, and yes, there are wealthy pensioners. We've had this argument before. The farmers thing as well. My view on the farmers thing, that they shouldn't have to pay inheritance tax unless there's not a generation of young farmers wanting to take the farm on. Lots of farmers, they have children. The children don't necessarily want to continue with the farm. So if that's the case, then they should sell it, or they should sell some land to pay the 20%. But if they're going to continue working the farm, I don't think that they should. Jonathan may disagree with me. So is she out of her depth? Should she go? She's made some decisions, and at the end of the day, she's always going to caveat everything with £22 billion.
OK, Jonathan Liss.
Well, we've had this discussion many times, Nana, and I'll give you the same answer that I gave before, which is that no, she's not out of her depth. Has she made mistakes? Yes. I think the biggest one, as I've said to you also many times, is the winter fuel cut. That was stupid politics, delivered stupidly at the wrong time. And it cost so much goodwill. It was totally unnecessary and unforced error. I think that Labour really regrets it. But there's no going back from that. But now, can it be rebuilt? Absolutely. Can it be repaired? For sure. We don't know the impact yet of the budget. That will take, a year or two to build
some of them. OK, so a family looking to buy a second home would be hit with an extra £5,975 in stamp duty. Right. Bringing the total tax rate, if you include the bit for if you send somebody to a private school, that'd be 13 grand. OK. Yeah, and also a family on an average income of £37,340 per adult will be hit by £2,529 of extra taxes in 2025.
OK, so I think that we need to get into these figures. I do not think that the vast majority of middle-class families cannot afford to send their kids to private schools.
But just because you don't think
No, but they can't.
No, just because you don't think it doesn't mean that that's not the case.
Are you disputing the fact that the vast majority of middle-class families are not sending their kids to private schools?
No,
7% of kids go to private schools.
Yeah, I'm not saying the vast majority of them do send them to private schools.
Right. Yeah. They can't, because they can't afford to. Or maybe they don't want to. Maybe it's for ideological reasons. They're choosing to send their kids to state schools, but most of them can't afford to. So I just don't agree with you. It's just something that is maybe from the 1980s. In the 1970s and 80s, middle-class families could often afford to send their kids to private schools.
Who told you that?
It was a lot more affordable in those days. If you look at how much private schools have risen, fees have risen in line with inflation, it's way more. It's not quite as much as house prices, but it's gone up a lot. So that's the point. So I just don't think the idea this is a middle-class tax rate. Most middle-class families don't get to buy second homes either. They can barely afford to have one home.
So in response to that, the majority of people who send their kids to private schools are actually middle class. They're not upper class. So if you take the proportion of people who are sending their kids to private schools, they're middle class people. They're middle class people who are working extremely hard to try and send their kids to a school to get a better education. They're not the multimillionaires. The multimillionaires, you can do whatever you like. They'll get around the tax in a legal way, but they won't. They'll pay ahead. They'll do something, but they won't necessarily pay the tax, and they really may not mind. But they are not the majority. I know this because I went to a private school. Most of the people there, most of the kids there, were from homes where their parents are working very, very hard. So that's the point that's been made here. So those are the parents who are actually helping to relieve the state of this burden of education, because the state is not doing a good job. But let's talk about, let's move on to the income tax. An extra amount of tax, £2,529. An average family earning £37,340 per adult will be now hit with an extra £2,500 of extra tax.
2,500 quid worth of extra tax, that's a hell of a lot.
Yeah, that is.
And combine that, and 7% of kids go to private schools. Does that mean that the 93%...
We're doing private schools next.
Sorry, forgive me. OK, so 2,500 quid is a hell of a lot to try and find. That's like 200 nicker, that's net. So we get taxed for, you get your gross salary, your net salary, 200 nicker net is a hell of a thing, is a hell of a hit for families to take. Now, can the average family... what's misleading or unhelpful in this article, in my opinion, is buying a second home. Because I agree with Jonathan, you know, if you're contemplating buying a second property, what are you going to do? You're going to rent it out, maybe a country home, maybe a... So
you're not in dire financial straits, let's put it that way.
No, I agree with Jonathan with that, but 2,500 quid is one hell of a hit to take. 200
Look,
liquor a month.
I think we have to so just to be really clear about this figure that the Telegraph has come up with. The majority of that is from private school fees, which, as I just said, very, very few people are actually having to deal with. And if they are, by definition, they are not just about managing. And the other bit is fiscal drag. Now, that is something that I have that I do think is really bad, but it is a policy that has been in place for many years now. It's a Conservative policy that Labour has continued. And basically, it means that you've frozen the tax thresholds. And so with inflation, with rising wages, more people are being dragged into, first of all, any income tax whatsoever after personal allowance, and then into the higher income tax brackets because obviously inflation, the thresholds are not rising in line with inflation as they were mandated to do actually in the 70s and 80s. I think that's a mistake. I think that they should be rising, but I think it's misleading to say this is some kind of new tax grab by the Labour Party. It isn't. It's a continuation of the policy.
I think the point that's been made here is the amount of taxes that are being raised. So if you were hit by each of them, then you would find yourself in spending a lot of money. So it is the amount of tax. The amount of taxes that has been raised is very high, and a lot of people in the middle class will be the ones that will be affected by it.
There are people, Jonathan, who are just about managing because they send their kids to private school. Just because you send your kids to private school doesn't mean that you have that excess cash in order to do it. You are just about, you're scraping by. Some people are so minted, it's paying £10 a term doesn't make any odds to them. But there's some people, I've got a neighbour, right, who's having to borrow £2,000 a year off her father. And they, believe me, they're not minted. They are just scraping by because they want the best for their kids. So they don't have flash cars, they don't go on holiday.
Well, I'd like to hear the Labour government maybe talking about how they're going to improve state schools without penalising the private sector. There's no need to do that. So how are they going to do that? Otherwise, all they'll be doing is flooding schools. But we were discussing that in just a moment. Stay with me. Just coming up to 31 minutes after 4 o'clock. I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio. Coming up in Worldview, are the cracks starting to show in the MAGA Make America Great Again movement? And is Elon Musk about to become even more powerful? But first, let's get your latest news headlines with Sam Francis.
Very good afternoon to you. It's just after 4:30. The top story this hour. Well, the King has paid tribute to the victims of a devastating plane crash in South Korea that killed 179 people, including, sadly, a 3-year-old boy. King Charles described the loss as profoundly saddening, offering prayers for the victims' families and loved ones. Footage shows the Boeing jet landing without wheels before skidding off the runway, crashing into a wall and then bursting into flames. 2 crew members were pulled to safety and remain conscious, according to local officials. An investigation is now underway, with bird strikes or poor weather being explored as potential causes. Well, we've also heard in just the last few minutes, in fact, that Sir Keir Starmer, Prime Minister here in the UK, has also sent his deepest condolences in a statement to the victims of that plane crash in South Korea, saying that he is thinking of all of those who have lost their lives in the tragic crash. In other news, the fatal crash of an Azerbaijan Airlines plane over Russia was caused by shooting from the ground, according to the country's president. Ilham Aliyev has criticised Russian officials for, he says, trying to hush up the truth about the crash, accusing them of showing false narratives about the causes. It comes after Russia's President Vladimir Putin has apologised for what he called the tragic incident after Russian air defences fired on the plane during a Ukrainian drone attack. However, the UK has dismissed Putin's apology, calling for a full and independent investigation. Here, the government says that ruthless criminals are those responsible for the deaths of 3 migrants after a small boat capsized in the English Channel this morning. A major rescue operation near Calais saved 45 people, with 4 still in hospital for hypothermia. Authorities also warn the death toll could continue to rise. It follows news that over 1,300 migrants have now crossed the Channel since Christmas Day, despite the government's promise to smash the gangs behind the crossings. 7 people have been arrested after an 18-year-old man was fatally stabbed in Ilkeston in Derbyshire on Saturday night. Police found that 18-year-old on Rose Avenue, but despite emergency efforts, he died later. Among those arrested are 4 17-year-old boys on suspicion of murder, while others are accused of helping an offender. Detectives say they're treating the case as isolated and are now pleading for any dashcam footage or CCTV from the area to help their investigation. Labour is facing a countryside crisis as new polling has revealed that rural voters are angry over a planned tax raid on family farms. A poll in the Telegraph newspaper suggests only 1 in 5 believe that Labour cares about countryside communities. Sir Keir Starmer's approval ratings among rural voters are being described as catastrophic, with concerns mounting over his so-called family farm tax. And wet winter weather is looming as the UK is bracing for yet more rain, now snow and a 70-mile-an-hour wind warning this New Year's Eve and into New Year's Day. Yellow warnings cover Northern Ireland, Northern England and Scotland from Monday, extending nationwide by the middle of next week. Heavy rain could also bring flooding to Wales and western Scotland, while northern areas are facing up to 10 centimetres of snow. Travel disruption is also expected across the UK, with forecasters urging people to check updates before heading outside. Those are the latest headlines. A full roundup from me at the top of the hour, and Nana will be back with you after this short break.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Hello there, welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. Well, as we move into 2025, the weather is certainly turning much more unsettled across the country. A risk of some disruption in places as areas of low pressure move in. But at the moment, we still have high pressure across the south, keeping things fairly settled here. But weather fronts already providing plenty of rain across Scotland. And if anything, as we go through the course of the evening, that rain intensifies across parts of Scotland. Also, could just see some snow beginning to fall across the higher ground. Further south, a fairly quiet night to come, albeit rather cloudy, but that cloud cover will generally give us a fairly mild night. Although some clearer skies across the very far south, we could see lows here of around 3 to 5 degrees. So if we start Monday morning across Scotland, it's going to be a wet and potentially snowy start for some of us. Warnings are in force right throughout Monday, and that will continue into New Year's Eve and potentially New Year's Day too. So if you do have any Hogmanay travel plans, do stay up to date with the latest warnings. The rain also beginning to move into parts of Northern Ireland and Northern England too, but the further south you are, generally a dry start with maybe a few glimmers of sunshine. But for most of us, really, it's going to be a fairly cloudy Monday. The best of any brightness really will be reserved across the far south. But even here, we could just see a few showers develop. But for Scotland especially, a very wet picture here, although the far northwest may well just turn a little bit drier as we move into the afternoon. Mild for most of us, but up across the far north, we're just starting to see this cold air just begin to move a bit further south. So a pretty cold afternoon to come for much of northern Scotland. Into the evening, another band of rain then begins to move into Scotland, so turning wet once again with, again, risk of some snow in places. Remaining fairly quiet for the time being across the south, but for all of us, as we move into 2025, it's turning unsettled with the risk of some wind, rain and potentially snow.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more. Whether it's breaking royal news, Will, please bring us up to date, or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons.
Very, very curious.
We bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent? I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back, 38 minutes after 4 o'clock. If you just joined us, welcome. This is GB News. We are Britain's news channel. I'm Nana Akua, and it's time now for our second great British debate of this hour. I'm asking, is Labour's private school VAT raid the politics of envy? Labour's VAT on private schools is expected to raise an average yearly fee by about 10%, making it difficult for families to find the funds. Bridget Phillipson defended the government's policy, saying tax exemptions on private schools are a luxury we cannot afford. So for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, is this private school VAT raid politics of envy? Joining me now, journalist and political commentator Jonathan Liss, also broadcaster and journalist Danny Kelly. All right, I will start with you, Danny Kelly.
I think it is ideologically driven, I really do, because we have this perception. It might be a reality, but the perception for a lot of people is that you're minted. You've got excess funds. We mentioned earlier on that, you know, people do scrape by, and the reason that they scrape by is because they send their children to private school because they want the best for their children. And unfortunately, the association with that is that you have all of this dough. Now, do you tax private healthcare? No, they don't. Do you tax university fees? No, they don't. But they have chosen private education, and I believe that I go back. Starmer said he's a socialist, and part of socialism is, and he's even said it himself, those with the broadest shoulders must take the heavier burden. I'm paraphrasing. But, you know, this is what socialists do. If you've got more dough, they want it off you. And here's a way to grab 20% because you're that minted, you've got excess dough, you can send your kids to private school. Well, I think it's ideologically driven.
Well, it seems odd because there's some big companies who they could target, and, you know, the Amazons and also the supermarkets and people who actually have real funds that you could actually tax in a way that would benefit us all, but instead they're going for private schools. Jonathan Liss.
Well, it's not either or. I think that Labour should have prioritised taxing the richest, introducing new taxes, whether that's a financial transactions tax or a wealth tax, or increasing the income tax band for those on sort of mega million salaries or whatever it is. That's not the route they went down.
Yes, I don't understand why that is. Seeing as they said those with the broadest shoulders would carry the heaviest burden. That's the point I was...
Well, there is a reasoning that, as we just said a moment ago, that people who are... The bulk of people who are sending their kids to private schools do have the broadest shoulders because they can afford to send their kids to private schools. This is not, you know, a 50-50 split in the country. 7% of children go to private schools. Obviously, that's going to be a majority of upper class. If you might, if it was all millionaires. No, I'm saying that.
Have you been to a private school?
What I said is that the majority of upper class people will be sending their kids. Some people that we might think of as middle class will also be sending their kids there. But now I think things have changed. Things have changed very much. Things have changed very much in the last 30 or 40 years, as we said a moment ago. 30 years ago, you'd have seen a much broader and more diverse range of kids in those private schools because fees were much lower than they are now. They've gone up way higher than inflation. Now it's really very, very well-off people. So the children of foreign oligarchs sending their kids to private schools in this country.
Have you been to private school?
Yeah, I went to private school. I did go to private school.
And when you were there, were there lots of most people like you? Sort of, are you average or are you wealthy? Were your parents wealthy?
We weren't poor, but we certainly weren't sort of mega rich.
Right, and were there lots of oligarchs there, or were the majority of people at those schools like you?
Well, obviously, there were some very, very wealthy kids there, of course. But the point I'm making is that, Nana, the point I'm making is that's not now.
No,
we're not a private school now.
No, that is now.
No, it's not. It's changed.
Where was the evidence?
It's changed.
It's not true. Look, it's not true. What you just said there, you just literally made it up.
I didn't make it up.
It hasn't changed.
Are you denying that private schools' fees have not risen higher than inflation?
Let me finish, yeah, because that would be good. OK, so you saying that the structure in which the people who are at the school has changed is rubbish. You don't know that. You're just saying that, OK? Now, as regard to the fees going up, yes, they've gone up. But the point that we are making here is that the people who will suffer the real burden of this are the people in the middle, because those people haven't changed. It is a similar formula of people that are going to these schools as it has been, as it was 30 years ago, as it is now. It's not full of oligarchs. And I think that's the problem with the Labour Party. They think it is. And from what you've said, you also think it is. Most people sending their kids to these private schools are just like you, just like me. They're average parents, probably giving up things to send them there. And this particular policy, in my view, and in many views, is the politics of envy. They're raising 1.6 billion. The education budget is about 116 billion. And this tiny piece, and that relies on a certain percentage of people sending their kids to these schools. And that's not going to happen.
I'm not sure, Jonathan, where do you get your figures from that 30 years ago fewer people sent their... Sorry, it was a lot cheaper to send proportionally. Yeah. It was, but surely if that's right, then more than 7% of kids would have gone to private school because it was a hell of a lot cheaper. Are you saying that in the 70s and 80s, more people sent their kids to school because it was cheaper?
I don't know what the figure of private education was in the 70s and 80s, but what I do know is what I just told you, which is that private school fees were a lot lower in relation to how they're... Well, I think they've gone up. I don't know the exact figure at hand.
Significantly cheaper.
Significantly cheaper. In the sense that you speak anecdotally, you meet a lot of people. I meet a lot of people of my sort of parents' generation who say that they would never be able to send their kids to private schools now. Their kids who are privately educated devastated. Their kids go to state schools because they just can't afford it. It's much less affordable now than it was 30, 40 years ago.
OK, listen, you say that, but, you know, people give up things to do this, and the majority of people sending their kids to private schools are not oligarchs. And I think that is the point that I think the Labour government are missing. They're not oligarchs, they're just normal people who are giving up holidays and all sorts of things to be able to facilitate that for their children. But the show is nothing without you and your views. Let's welcome our great British voices, their opportunity to be on the show and tell us what they think about the topics we're discussing. Let's head to Kidderminster, have a chat with John Reid. I don't know whether John Reid's going to have any sympathy for parents sending their kids to private schools, but we shall find out. John.
Yeah, good afternoon, Nana. I'm with you and I'm with Danny on this one. I don't think the Labour's private school VAT raid is the politics of envy. It's just politics that are wrong. What's the point? You know, supposing they drove half of the private kids into state education, then the government would have to pay, wouldn't it? It would have to pay for their education. So I don't really see that that's the direction it should be going. I went to an ordinary state school. I didn't come to any harm, didn't get any great qualifications, just made the best of it. And I think the vast majority of people who do go are like that. And I've got two daughters who work in education as teachers. And I think they'd probably agree with me, you know, that most people go to state school and get a good education. Some don't, but then they wouldn't anywhere where they went. As to private schools, I think they should be maintained. They should continue exactly as they are. I can't really see that any money the government makes out of the VAT is actually very much worth having, really. So, yeah, I'm with you, Nana and Danny, and Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year. John Reid, thank you very much. Those are his thoughts. What are yours? Do you think it's the politics of envy? Let me know. gbnews.com/your say. And also, just a reminder, you can join GB News for the ultimate countdown to 2025. Bev, Patrick, Emily, Ben and Darren will all be together for a very, very special show. GB News' New Year's Live, 10 p.m. on New Year's Eve. Do not miss it. And if you're in search for some winter sun, here are the forecasts for some of the top European holiday destinations.
Can't wait to get in that sea.
Lovely and warm.
Just like the feeling of having great travel insurance.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations forecast.
Hello there, welcome to your latest winter sun forecast. Well, as we see out 2024, it's going to remain fairly unsettled for parts of Cyprus and Greece. This area of cloud and rain continues to linger here. But for much of Italy, Spain and Portugal, a fairly quiet couple of days with some late winter sunshine here. A few showers for Madeira, maybe just creeping into Canaries. But as we approach New Year's Day itself, it should be fairly fine and dry across the Canaries.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations forecast.
Right, so you're with me, I'm Nana Akua. This is a GB News. We are live on TV, online and on digital radio. We are Britain's news channel. Coming up in Worldview, we'll head over to the United States and ask, is Elon Musk about to become even more powerful?
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial. And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
Dora Carrington is not known to lots of people, and very few pieces are in public collections. So you have had a great deal of work to do to put this exhibition together.
Absolutely. It's been, next year, it will be 30 years since the last major exhibition of Carrington's work, which happened in 1995 at the Barbican Gallery. And I guess if people know Carrington's work, they might have seen the film that took place that year, that came out that year, starring Emma Thompson as Carrington and Jonathan Pryce as Lytton Strachey, who was her main kind of key relationship in her life. And that, in a way, dramatised a lot of those relationships. And so people will often know her life as much as her art. There's only 16 works in public collections. And so apart from chances such as the big billboard campaign you mentioned 10 years ago, there have been very few chances to actually see her work in the flesh. And so what this exhibition does is bring together around 80 works by Carrington and a few of her key contemporaries, providing a new generation really a chance to see and enjoy her work. She was one of the most remarkable of her generation at the Slade School of Art. She won several prizes for her drawing and her draftsmanship. And in the first room of the exhibition, we have some of the work, for example, a couple of female nudes that she painted when she was at the Slade, and they really are kind of quite outstanding.
One of the things that's been said is that in her landscapes, she's sometimes painting the human body as well as the landscape. Is that something that occurred to you? Can you stand up that?
Yes, I mean, one of her most famous paintings we have of Spain has. It's very much like you could liken it to the female form. You know, the kind of the
delicately put.
Yes.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, welcome. This is GB News. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio. Don't forget as well, you can download the GB News app. It is completely free, and check out everything on the channel. I'm Nana Akua. Now let's travel over to America, because it's time for Worldview, and have a word with the host of the Politics People podcast, Paul Dudderidge. Paul, talk to me. Donald Trump, potentially, they could attempt to block him from taking office. How on earth can they do that?
There are serious moves afoot now. There was an article in The Hill written by a couple of constitutional lawyers the other day, and there is momentum gathering to try, and there's a section of the Constitution, and it's Amendment 14, Section 3, that says anybody that has been involved in an insurrection or has assisted those involved in an insurrection is precluded from taking the office of president. And even though nobody has been charged with insurrection, by the way, that's never, there's no charges. Nobody's actually been charged or found guilty of insurrection. These lawyers are the way lawyers do, are knitting together enough circumstantial evidence to make the claim that Donald Trump is unable to take the oath of office because he has assisted those involved and actually incited an insurrection. Even though this has never been actually proven. It's been taken to court, it's been read in court, but he was impeached for this, but he's never actually been found guilty of insurrection. So this is actually quite serious. There are now moves afoot to try and stop this administration taking place. We're all looking at January the 20th for the actual inauguration. But prior to that, you get January the 3rd. These are the dates to look for. January the 3rd, where the new Congress, who just got elected, they will be sworn in on January the 3rd. And January the 6th will be when the actual votes, this is what happened last January the 6th, when the actual votes from the delegates nationwide will be counted, and he will actually, be accepted as president. So anytime between now and the 20th, we've got these obstacles to get over. But yes, lawyers, and Washington is full of lawyers. They are seeking to stop him by using
J.D. Vance is probably even further to the right than Donald Trump. So if Donald Trump doesn't take office, then I presume it will be J.D. Vance. Would it not be that? They can't have another election.
It would.
And the American people would be absolutely furious. I don't think that's going to work out. What about Elon Musk, though? Potentially he could be the Speaker of the House.
This is fantastic. I don't know if you know there's this quirk in the US Constitution. You don't need to be a member of the House of Representatives. You don't have to be voted in at all to be Speaker of the House. It's never happened before, but the Constitution doesn't stop just Joe Schmo from Kokomo becoming Speaker of that. I could be Speaker of the House. It's hilarious. And so this has come from, again, serious senators. Rand Paul floated this the other day. Marjorie Taylor Greene supports it because they want a radical speaker. They feel a bit let down by Mike Johnson at the moment, and they want a radical speaker. The Rand Paul tweet. And so Elon Musk, what we're going to see from January the 20th, Trump will get in, the lawyers won't be successful. We're going to see the nearest thing to a revolution without actually bloodshed. Trump is coming in with absolutely no respect for permanent Washington. And we very much could see Musk as speaker.
very quickly, because I want to ask you about the MAGA and Musk divided over the visas. Now, I didn't think it sounded like they were. I think they were saying different things, but about different things. But what's your take on it?
Well, personally, I'm a big fan of the H1 visas. It's there's these visas that allow people involved in tech largely to come in and work for American companies and grow the American economy. The thing is, there's a branch of MAGA, and I'm very, very MAGA. There's a branch of MAGA that doesn't want any foreign immigration at all, and that's never been the understanding. The understanding is we want to get rid of illegal mass immigration, and that's usually low-paid, low-skilled workers. But there is a division now, and Elon Musk is taking it to them, and he's cancelling people's blue ticks on Twitter if they are from MAGA, but basically wanting to end all immigration. And H-1B visas are just basically visas for tech people, usually coming from India, etc., to work in the major tech companies.
We're out of time. Thank you very much, Paul Duttridge. Plenty more to come. Stay tuned. This is GB News. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio. The weather is next.
Despite the morning rain, it'll be a nice, warm, cosy day ahead. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. Well, as we move into 2025, the weather is certainly turning much more unsettled across the country. A risk of some disruption in places as areas of low pressure move in. But at the moment, we still have high pressure across the south, keeping things fairly settled here. But weather fronts already providing plenty of rain across Scotland. And if anything, as we go through the course of the evening, that rain intensifies across parts of Scotland. Also, could just see some snow beginning to fall across the higher ground. Further south, a fairly quiet night to come, albeit rather cloudy, but that cloud cover will generally give us a fairly mild night. Although some clearer skies across the very far south, we could see lows here of around 3 to 5 degrees. So if we start Monday morning across Scotland, it's going to be a wet and potentially snowy start for some of us. Warnings are in force right throughout Monday, and that will continue into New Year's Eve and potentially New Year's Day too. So if you do have any Hogmanay travel plans, do stay up to date with the latest warnings. The rain also beginning to move into parts of Northern Ireland and Northern England too, but the further south you are, generally a dry start with maybe a few glimmers of sunshine. But for most of us, really, it's going to be a fairly cloudy Monday. The best of any brightness really will be reserved across the far south. But even here, we could just see a few showers develop. But for Scotland especially, a very wet picture here, although the far northwest may well just turn a little bit drier as we move into the afternoon. Mild for most of us, but up across the far north, we're just starting to see this cold air just begin to move a bit further south. So a pretty cold afternoon to come for much of northern Scotland. Into the evening, another band of rain then begins to move into Scotland, so turning wet once again with, again, risk of some snow in places. Remaining fairly quiet for the time being across the south, but for all of us as we move into 2025, it's turning unsettled with the risk of some wind, rain and potentially snow.
There will be a light breeze in the morning, leading to a warm front. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
You could be joining the Great British Giveaway list of winners with your chance to grab a fantastic £50,000 in tax-free cash.
My name is Cliff.
And my name is Julie, and we won $25,000. I'd say don't hesitate, do it. If you're not in it, you've got no chance of winning it.
For another chance to win, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. You can call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB10 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 31st of January. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
British 10-year-old has beaten Stephen Hawking and Albert Einstein in an IQ test, would you believe? Genius Krish Arora got the maximum score of 162, which puts him in the top 1% globally.
Goodness me. Well, Krish's parents noticed his brilliant potential after learning he could read fluently by the age of 4.
Krish, how does it feel to be a child genius?
I feel really happy and privileged.
Aww. Do you see it as a gift that you have?
Yeah.
Oh, that's just wonderful. Nichelle, what do you make of your child being a genius? When did it become apparent to you that Krish had something different, something special?
I think at the age of 4, he was doing things that were way beyond and above his age.
Yeah.
He could read fluently and he could spell correctly, and he was doing complex decimal divisions. So we thought that he's on to something. I think there's a spark out here.
Wow. And how are you reading books, Krish? Did you just pick them up from your mum and dad's bookshelf and just start reading to yourself?
We used to go to the library and we got books.
Such a good tip. Such a good tip as parents.
Yeah.
Head to the library, take your kids to the library.
So, Nichelle, can Krish just do it all? Is he just an all-rounder genius? Every subject, every talent, he can do it all?
Absolutely, and he helps out the family as well. He's been teaching me grade 1 piano, and he hopes, and I repeat, he hopes that I'm going to complete it in 12 months' time. And he also helps out Mum, because when Mum is teaching his sister, Mum sometimes says, Krish, go solve that problem and, help your sister out. So, yes, he can do it all.
Krish, you're a superstar.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Hello, good afternoon and welcome to GB News. We are live on TV, online and on digital radio. It's 5 o'clock. I'm Nana Akua. And for the next hour, me and my panel will be taking on some of the big topics hitting the headlines right now. This show is all about opinion. It's mine, it's theirs, and of course it's yours. We'll be debating, discussing, and at times we will disagree, but no one will be cancelled. So joining me in the last hour, journalist and political commentator Jonathan Liss, and also broadcaster and journalist Danny Kelly. Coming up, a couple of Great British debates. I'm asking, is the Great British High Street dead? Then, stay tuned for the interview. I speak to a father and son farming duo after a new poll reveals that Labour are losing support in rural areas. Plus, Ed Gimel and Chris Morrison will go head-to-head to debate whether Ed Miliband's £37 billion plan to make Britain net zero by 2029 is really worth it. And don't forget, in our poll of the day, do you agree with half of Britons who think 2025 will be worse than 2024? But before we get started, let's get your latest news with Sam Francis.
Very good evening to you. It's just after 5 o'clock. The top story tonight. The King and the Prime Minister are among those paying tribute to the victims of a devastating plane crash in South Korea that killed 179 people, including a 3-year-old boy. King Charles described the loss as profoundly saddening, offering prayers for the victims' families and loved ones. Footage shows the Boeing jet landing without wheels before skidding off the runway, crashing into a wall and then bursting into flames. 2 crew members were pulled to safety and remain conscious, according to officials. The crash is one of South Korea's deadliest air disasters, and investigations are now underway into whether a bird strike caused the gear failure. Well, the travel and aviation expert Sally Gethin has been speaking to us today about the events that led to that crash.
Seems to have suffered a catastrophic bird strike, which might sound nothing in the scheme of things, but actually, when you consider the powerful engines on board, any bird strike is very critical in a case like this. And that triggered a chain of events where the pilots could not keep in control. They could not deploy the landing gear in time. And then they ran out of runway effectively at that point. They skidded off the runway and they ran right into a wall. They have recovered one of the black boxes. Once they've recovered both black boxes, the investigation will begin properly.
The fatal crash of an Azerbaijan Airlines plane over Russia was caused by shooting from the ground, according to the country's president. Ilham Aliyev has criticised Russian officials for trying to hush up the truth about the crash, accusing them of sowing false narratives about the causes. It comes after Russia's President Vladimir Putin has apologised for what he called the tragic incident after Russian air defences fired on the plane. But the UK has dismissed Putin's apology, calling for a full and an independent investigation into the deadly incident. The government says that ruthless criminals are responsible for the deaths of 3 migrants after a small boat capsized in the Channel this morning. A major rescue operation near Calais saved 45 people, with 4 still in hospital. Authorities say the death toll could rise further. It follows news that over 1,300 migrants have now crossed the Channel since Christmas, despite the government's promise to smash the gangs behind the crossings. Labour is facing a countryside crisis as new polling has revealed that rural voters are angry over a planned tax raid on family farms. A poll in the Telegraph newspaper suggests only 1 in 5 believe that Labour truly care about the countryside. Sir Keir Starmer's approval ratings among rural voters are now being described as catastrophic, with concerns mounting over his so-called family farm tax. The Prime Minister is also under pressure to address backlash after a major speech on a plan for change. The Education Secretary says that tax breaks for private schools are a luxury we can't afford ahead of a new policy coming into effect. Bridget Phillipson's defended the plan to end exemptions, claiming it will raise more than £1.8 billion each year to, she says, fund state schools and recruit more teachers. Critics, though, including the Conservative Party, say it's vindictive policy that will only hurt children's education. But the government insists the policy is supported by middle-class parents who are struggling to pay for private school fees. 7 people have been arrested after an 18-year-old man was fatally stabbed in Derbyshire on Saturday night. Police found the young victim on Rose Avenue, but despite emergency efforts, he died nearby. Among those arrested are 4 17-year-old boys on suspicion of murder, while others are accused of helping an offender. Detectives say they're treating the case as isolated, but are appealing for CCTV or dashcam footage from the area to help the investigation. The UK has pledged millions more to help investigate Russian war crimes in Ukraine. The government's announced an additional £4.5 million to support bodies like the Ukrainian Prosecutor General's office in holding war criminals to account. It follows an earlier pledge of more than £6 million for war crime prosecutions. It comes as the UN has already confirmed that war crimes have taken place during the conflict. And wet winter weather is looming as the UK braces for rain, possible snow and 70-mile-an-hour winds this New Year's Eve. Yellow warnings cover Northern Ireland, Northern England and Scotland from Monday right through until Wednesday. Heavy rain could also bring flooding to Wales and Western Scotland, while northern areas are facing possible blizzards of up to 10 centimetres. And travel disruption is expected across much of the UK, with forecasters urging people to check for updates before heading outside. That's the latest from me for now. I'll be back with you in half an hour. Up next is Nana.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Good afternoon. It's fast approaching 7 minutes after 5 o'clock. I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News. We are Britain's news channel. Before we get stuck into the debates, here's what else is coming up today. In the Great British Debate, I'll be asking, is the Great British High Street dead? Then, coming up in the interview, a farmer and son farming duo. I'll be speaking to them after a new poll reveals that Labour are losing support of rural voters. Plus, is Ed Miliband's £37 billion plan to make Britain net zero by 2029 really worth it? Stay tuned, that is on the way. As ever, send me your thoughts, post your comments at gbnews.com/your say. So Ed Miliband and his net zero spending spree to make Labour hit their target 2029. Clean energy will cost an astonishing £37 billion in public money. Now, this revelation comes as ministers draw up plans to subsidise the cost of fitting solar panels and energy storage batteries in homes across the UK. But is it all worth it? Well, joining me now, Environment Editor at the Daily Sceptic, Chris Morrison, and also leader of Climate Party, Ed Gemmill. Gemmell, welcome to the programme. Thank you both. All right, I'm going to start.
Hi, Chris.
Thank you very much. OK, Chris, I'm going to start with you. Chris, it's a lot of money, isn't it? What do you think? Is it worth it?
A chicken feed, Nana. A mere 39 billion. I'll raise you 125 billion for a start, which is the amount in the next 6 years UK consumers will pay directly on their electricity bill to pay for all of this useless renewable energy. This was revealed recently in the budget. The OB, the Office for Budget Responsibility, showed that next year it had soared the amount that we pay directly on our electricity bills to £16 billion. That's £600 for every household in this country to pay for the windmills. And if you look at it like this, the 125 billion, which it adds up to over 6 years, compare that to the 1.5 billion that they saved on the winter fuel allowance. This is the out of control subsidies, the out of control spending on everything in order to go to this idea that you can take the world off hydrocarbons, which is a fantasy in itself.
All right, Ed Gemmell, your thoughts?
Well, yeah, I mean, I sort of agree with Chris on one thing, at least. It is a pathetically small amount. I mean, if you're investing in the incredible opportunities that are coming, the commercialization of net zero, and the vast amount of money that's going to be spent on it over the next 25 years, the idea that you would use such a small amount of money that it equates to only 3.5 months of the interest on our national debt. So that's just the interest payments on our national debt. This is 3.5 months. And if this is going to be spent over 5 years, it's pathetically small. The opportunity in terms of net zero, 93% of the world's economy is on its way to net zero and is under a net zero commitment. There is a vast $1 trillion opportunity there that Britain needs to get to the front of and start making money from. And the idea that we're going to put in this paltry small amount of money to get there is ridiculous.
Well, it's easy for you to say that because, Ed, you're not really probably somebody on the breadline. You're not somebody who probably couldn't afford the solar panels that the government are suggesting. These solar panels are actually quite expensive. They might be subsidising it, but you're asking people, and many who don't actually probably own their own homes, to put their hand in their pocket, even though they're having a subsidy, to have these solar panels and electric cars and everything else that comes with this net zero on the assumption they've got the money to do it. People may not have the money to do this, and surely the aim for this is cheap energy. Energy wouldn't be cheap if this was to carry on. Would it?
Yes, obviously you're jumping to conclusions about whether or not I can afford it or not, so we'll leave that one for the moment. But the secondary part of it is this is actually leading to greater energy security and eventually reduction in our bills. I mean, our bills have been artificially high over the last 4 or 5 years because the price of gas has been forcing it higher. We pay the wholesale price for the production of electricity is based on the most expensive unit to produce that electricity, which has been gas and particularly high since, of course, the Russia-Ukraine war. So, in fact, what we're doing is if we can get this solved, and to be honest, it's not about net zero for the whole of Britain, it's just net zero for our electricity system. If we can get this solved, it will provide us with lower bills ultimately going forward, and we will not be beholden to the vagaries of a market which relies
No. This is okay. So, can you afford the solar panels then? Can you afford the solar panels? Because we might get a subsidy, but we'll have to pay for this. And also, you're saying that, but remember, China. These are the people that are making the panels, aren't they? So, aren't we now beholden to China?
Absolutely. And what we've allowed is we've allowed China to make all the money on net zero. They realised it 5 or 10 years ago. They got on with it, and now they dominate the production of solar panels, all forms of renewables, batteries, EVs, and they are holding control of the production of rare earth metals and minerals.
All right, Chris Morrison.
Well, I don't get this idea where suddenly it's cheap. It's not cheap. It's very, very expensive. It's renewables are useless. They're low kinetic energy. They require vast amounts of subsidy. And the thing is that going forward, as we are going to, they will require even more. The more you put in, the more it costs. And there's a very good reason for this. 2 weeks ago, wind was producing 4% of our energy to the electric grid, and solar was nothing. It was nothing today, in fact, because it was quite cloudy. So this went on for about 2 weeks. And it was across Europe as well. What happens? You have to have gas on standby. Now, the new nationalised unit running the electricity operation has admitted, Mr. Fintan Sline has admitted that you need, even if you get to 2030, 95% renewables, you will still need 5% for the times when the wind doesn't blow and the sunbeams don't come out. And for that, you need an entire fleet of gas turbines on standby. And it gets worse than that. that, because you have two separate systems. The more you put in, the more you rely on a backup. And you, as I said, you have these enormous subsidies. You have these subsidies of £16 billion a year, and these are turning them off, turning them on, and all sorts of things that go wrong when you're relying on windmills. First invented, by the way, at the time of Henry II, 1150, if I remember my dates right. You're relying on a completely useless technology, so it will only get more expensive. In the gas business, for instance, to keep gas on standby for a mere 5%, you've got to get an entire industry. You've got to pay money to keep these things so that they will fire up at a moment's notice. They've got to be kept on constant standby. You have to pay all these people. You have to provide career opportunities for people to go into gas. You have to keep the whole thing running simply because the wind doesn't blow and you're relying on something that is completely useless to run a modern industrial society.
Ed Kimmel.
Yeah, I mean, Chris and I don't often agree on something, but we will agree on something here, is that we've got to get rid of that gas. It's ridiculous to be relying on it. And how do we do it? And Chris will probably agree with me here. In terms of industrial opportunity, Tide is a massive opportunity. We need to be investing in doing Tidal, which we haven't for 30 years. And we keep making the excuse that it's too expensive to invest in. But why do all these other technologies get cheaper? Because we invest in them, and we do them over decades. We have something like 20 gigawatts of tidal power capacity, totally predictable. We know when it's on, we know when it's off, it's easy to work around, and we won't need the gas standby, certainly not to the extent we're talking about at the moment, and we aren't investing in it. Well, this is an opportunity for Britain to get energy security and to lead the world and drive enormous export opportunities.
Well, this is a convincing argument, isn't it, Chris?
I get very worried when Ed keeps saying he agrees with me. That's not the point of the programme, surely. And he doesn't agree with me, really, because the tidal, ask him about the Swansea tidal barrier. This was the great White Hope in South Wales. They were going to, and in fact, I know about this because I used to go to university in Swansea. I looked over Swansea Bay for 4 years. They were going to harness the tides. They worked out that it would take about 137 years to pay it back. You know, the thing is useless. You're building these huge constructions. You're not getting a huge amount of energy from them. I mean, admittedly, when you do put them up, you can harvest the tides, but the cost is enormous. The cost of all of these things, hydrogen, highly explosive, difficult to store, lots and lots of problems with it, and ridiculously expensive to produce. You have carbon, you have batteries. Well, nobody mentions batteries anymore because, well, first of all, there aren't enough child slaves in the Congo to mine all the cobalt, but leaving that aside, they simply cannot provide more than about 5 minutes worth of capacity. So all of these things that Ed, and I hope he doesn't agree with me this time, because we want to get a bit of a disagreement going, all of these things are as useless as wind. They are as useless as wind. They do not work. We tried them. Some of them are not really new technologies. We tried them at scale, we tried all sorts of things, and they simply do not provide, which is why Mr. Fintan Sly, in his wisdom, said that the only thing we have in 2030 and into the near future after that is gas.
Well, Ed, I mean, it does sound like that does seem to be the main thing that we need. We need some sort of backup for these things, these supposed renewable energies that are supposed to be effective. Surely, Ed?
I mean, look, we don't agree on Tide, so let's get that one out there, Chris. You're happy with that one. And the reason we don't agree on Tide is it can be done. It is being done in half a dozen places around the country. We've just had a couple more that have come through in the contracts for different scheme, so a few months ago. They are being done, but they aren't being scaled because we keep saying it's too expensive. And how many times will you have heard that in different industries in the past where we said it's too expensive, so we haven't invested? And then what have we done? We paid China for the privilege of it over the course of the next following decades. We have got to grip that moment and do it now. Now, we did talk about Wales there, and there's an interesting project which is an illustration of where we're not investing, Port Talbot. So what we're doing is we're getting rid of our steel works there to have effectively what's a recycling plant for steel. Whereas in Sweden at the moment, for the same money, approximately 1.5 billion cash, they are building a 95% decarbonised new steel production plant, and they've got orders coming out of their ears at the moment. They're expecting to get it up to double the capacity of Port Talbot by the end of this decade.
Ed, is it a recycling plant for steel, or can it produce virgin steel, this one that you're talking about?
Virgin steel. So in Sweden, virgin steel, cash investment, roughly similar to ours, about 1.5 billion. Yes, there's debt on it, which there always is. Debt follows cash. And they're going to be producing it virgin steel, and we should be doing both. It is nuts. And to be honest, we may agree again on something, I think, Chris. 37 billion here, and there isn't an investment in our steel industry where there should be. giving us green steel of the future.
Well, listen, I think everyone would agree that we shouldn't have got rid of our steel industry. It seems utter madness, and I don't know why, but it was our friend Ed Miliband who carried on with this policy and continued it. So, you know, and as for carbon capture, it's been used, tried in many cases, one plant in Milwaukee where they spent billions and in the end they abandoned it because it didn't work. So, I don't know. But anyway, Ed Gemmell, thank you very much. And also Chris Morrison, really good to talk to you both. Appreciate your time.
Thanks,
Well, this is GB News. We're live on GB News, on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. Coming up, the interview. A farmer and his young son will join me to discuss whether Labour have lost the rural vote and what's next for British farming.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop star to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Well, let's speak now to Sales Director at Savills for Quinta Properties, Raquel Santos, who is live for us in Portugal. Raquel, good to see you this morning. Why are all these celebrities flocking to Portugal all of a sudden?
Yeah, I guess it's just because of basically the great lifestyle that we have, security, you know, Portugal has kind of been a hidden, tucked away gem for quite a while that people didn't realize existed. And with the international flights that have, you know, with the American flights coming in, it's kind of been put back on the map as a country that's worth visiting and worth investing in due to the secure investments that we offer in real estate.
Raquel, is it anything to do with tax rates? Because I think capital gains tax is, I think if it's over a certain amount, you pay half of your rate, which is 28%. Capital gains on shares and cryptocurrencies is 0. Is it anything to do with that? Because over here in the UK, big storm at the moment about millionaires apparently leaving in exodus because of the mooted increases in taxes in just a few weeks.
Yes, so obviously the alterations that are happening with the UK in terms of the tax that's being implemented on the capital gains, as you mentioned, we've definitely noticed has become a big drive, mostly on the vendor side as well, who are looking to sell because they don't want to be hit, you know, with these higher capital gains, which is close to coming into effect.
Raquel, have you noticed then millionaires, high net worth people from the UK getting in touch with you looking to relocate?
Definitely. It's for multiple reasons, obviously, the changes that are due to come into place, obviously, and Portugal just seems to be a safe option always when things do kind of change. People opt to come into Portugal because we're quite steady, we're quite stable.
GB News, the People's Channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking, this is a nightmare for the Conservatives again. Down to earth. It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it? And most importantly, honest. Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them. Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
Good afternoon, welcome. If you've just tuned in, welcome. This is GB News. You're near the end of the show, but, you know, try and tune in at 3 o'clock. That's when we started. I'm Nana Akua. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio. And it's now time for this week's interview. So Keir Starmer's popularity has taken a tumble as the Labour Party loses favour amongst rural voters. And a new survey by Public First reveals that only 1 in 5 voters believe the government cares about people who live and work in the countryside. All of this comes after increasing backlash over the ongoing farmers' inheritance tax row. So has Labour lost the support of country dwellers? Well, joining me now, father and son family duo Clive and Henry Bailey. Now, thank you so much for joining me. Really appreciate your time. I want to ask you, first of all, with this inheritance tax plan, will it affect you? So Keir Starmer and his party seem to think it won't affect many farmers. Will it affect your farm?
Hi, Nana. Thanks for asking us on. Yeah, of course it affects us. It affects
thousands. I think the numbers that have been put out by the NFU and other independent sources are around 75,000 farmers, not the 500 number that they keep defaulting back to, which frankly is becoming quite insulting now. It's been proven that's based on the wrong data, so it affects us personally dramatically. Yeah, it means that the inheritance tax bill, when my father passes away, will mean that to pay that, we'll have to probably sell the farm, or certainly a proportion of it, which is not something I want to do, and that takes away the opportunity for future generations like Henry here to continue farming like my father did and my grandfather before him.
So how big is your farm? What if you were to value it now, what would you say it was worth?
So we farm about 1,000 acres of cereals, combinable crops, of our own land. Some's owned by us. We have loans on some of it as well, as because we've bought more land as time goes on. We also contract farm and rent land that we farm for other people. So overall, kind of an area you need to be farming cereals. We don't have livestock, so we farm oilseed rape, wheat, barley, beans, those kind of crops. So cereals, all things that go through combine harvesters. And unless you're farming, kind of at least 500-600 acres, the scale wouldn't add up to provide a return on investment. So in our own case, there would be probably £10 million worth of capital assets invested in doing that, but that will return a 0.5% return on investment, which means that, effectively we've got £50,000 profit a year. After tax, that's 35 or so, and there's 2 generations living off that. So although the asset value is big, it's only money the day we sell it. While we're farming it, we're just living off the returns from that, which aren't excessive, aren't high, and quite frankly would be better off in just about invested anywhere else. So
a lot of people don't really think it. I mean, to me personally, it doesn't make sense why you would bite the hand that feeds. It seems utter madness, because we need farmers, and we need them to pass things on to their kids, so their kids will also do the same thing, because it's not an easy job. Can I ask Henry how he feels about farming? Because I presume he goes on jobs with you and does work with you, Henry. Do you enjoy farming?
Yeah, it's always been like a dream of mine to inherit my dad's farm when I'm older. And it's one of my favourite things to do, just help working around the farm.
Yeah, and presumably when you get older, you were thinking that you would pass the farm on to your children. Yeah.
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 See, as a parent as well. No, as a parent, it's almost a crazy thing for me to advise my children to do, because actually they would be financially far better off choosing just about any other career than continuing to farm. But I think most farmers agree with me. We don't do it for the money, clearly, because as I've said, those returns are so small. It's a fantastic lifestyle, kind of, a brilliant way of life. It's vocational, and that's why children like Henry grow up kind of, helping their parents out on the farm from really quite a young age and grow up wanting to do it. So no one really does it for the money, and that's the point that's being missed here. And if we were making money out of it, I mean, the whole farming's a bit broken. It's not what's happened in the budget is like the straw that broke the camel's back, I think, for a lot of farmers. We've got a situation where there's been this race to the bottom from the big retailers, supermarkets over the last 20 years or so, most of my kind of farming career, which has put cheap food on people's plates, which is great. I think it's good that it's affordable, but that's come at the cost of farmers. It's squeezed our margins down and down and down to the point where they're now basically non-existent. So there's nothing left to give anymore. We've kind of been happy, I think, as industry to try and facilitate that, but you reach a point where there's just nothing left. So you put this tax on, and it really is that point where you go, well, okay, I'm prepared to not do it for a huge return or income, and have all that capital invested that could be invested better elsewhere. But, because, hey, that vocation, that lifestyle I've enjoyed, my father enjoyed, my grandfather enjoyed, my children will get that opportunity as well. You take that away, there's no point anymore. So why do we carry on? We just sell.
Why do you think that there seems to be this perception? Because I think that's why they must have done it, is they said those with the broadest shoulders would carry the heaviest burden. Why do you think there seems to be some perception that farmers are really wealthy and really well off?
Well, we are wealthy in terms of that asset base. There's no getting away from that. It'd be silly to deny otherwise. But farmers don't see their land or their machinery or their livestock as pound notes. When I talk to other farmers, they'll say, oh, how many acres do you farm? A bit like you asked earlier, not like how much money have you got invested? How many cattle do you milk, or how many sheep do you have? They don't see it, in financial terms, because it's not for sale. I mean, we've sat down in recent weeks since the budget with our accountants and advisors, and I've sat with my 78-year-old father, who's I've never seen him quite so upset about things. But we have sat down with him and put in front of him, look, these are the numbers. This is what the land and the machinery and the buildings that we store crops in and the farmhouse and whatever is worth. And you can see he just cannot accept that, because he doesn't see it in pounds and pence terms. He sees it as acres and, you know, a grain store and that kind of thing, because it was never for sale as far as concerned. Look, we don't mind paying our taxes. If we make profits, we pay taxes like any other business. You know, our employees, or we pay our income taxes, we pay POIE, we pay corporation tax, we pay VAT on all the things that the products, our duties on fuels and everything else, just like any other business would do. And, you know, I'm happy to do so. You know, the more money, if I can keep in, I've invested significantly through my lifetime running the farm. My father did the same, my grandfather the same, to build a business that could generate more profits. And then, of course, that makes more tax. That's the growth that Rachel Reeves says and Keir Starmer say they want. So we've done that, and I'm happy to pay tax on that. But I won't continue to grow a business that's uninvestable right now. You know, the opposite, in fact, you know, is going to happen, where we just cash out of it. You know, yeah, we do turn those into wealth. Yeah.
Well, that's the point I'm making, because you say you are wealthy, but you're not really wealthy in the sense that you can't really sell the land if you want to carry on with the business. But then if you do sell the land, you can realise the asset, and then at that point you can make money. But the real money is in actually selling the land. It's not keeping it. That's the point I'm making. In keeping the land, you're actually not making that much money. So would you be tempted to sell then? Does this incentivise you? Do you want to sell up and just move on if the government persists with this?
If they don't listen, if things don't change, if they don't get more realistic about this, and first off, in my own case, I think with my parents, kind of quite elderly, it's too late. They say, oh, you can rearrange your family affairs and whatever, but it's too late. You know, they've dropped this on. We have planned as a family about succession. I think there's this misconception that, oh well, people, why haven't they planned? Why haven't they passed things earlier? We had the plan with good advice based on the agricultural property and business property reliefs. It's too late for my parents to change that now. They're in their late 70s. They would need to live another 7 years. They don't sadly enjoy the greatest of health. So yeah, really, in my particular case, I don't, at some point when that very sad day comes, I don't think I will have any choice. You know, if I've got a business that is returning 0.5% return on investment, 0.5% return, and okay, they're going to give it this 10 years to pay the 20% inheritance tax bill. Well, that over 10 years, interest free, that's very generous of them, that's 2%. So if I'm making 0.5% and I've got a 2% a year tax bill, that's before I've lived. I've got a 1.5% problem before I've even paid myself, yeah? So it can't be done. So I would have to sell. But that aside, I think what's gone on a little bit in the last few weeks, I think a lot of farmers are just starting to question anyway. You know, 0.5% return on investment, a government that clearly doesn't want us, it seems. It really does. It's not just about the money. It really does feel like, you know, they want rid of what we're doing.
Well, listen, it's really good to talk to you, Clive, and Henry. Thank you so much for your thoughts. It doesn't make sense to me, but hopefully maybe they'll consider U-turning or perhaps increasing the threshold, which their own accountants had suggested that it should be nearer 20 million, not where it is now. But listen, it's really good to talk to you. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. Thank you. That is, of course, Clive and Henry Bale. They are both farmers. Now you're with me. I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News, 31 minutes after 5 o'clock. Welcome. Still to come, we'll continue with the Great British Debate. I'm asking, is the High Street, the Great British High Street, is it now dead? You'll hear the thoughts of my panel, Danny Kelly and also Jonathan Liss. But first, let's get your latest news headlines with Sam Francis.
Very good evening to you. 5:31 exactly. Well, the King and Prime Minister have paid tribute to the victims of a plane crash in South Korea that killed 179 people, including a 3-year-old boy. King Charles described the loss as profoundly saddening, offering prayers for the victims' families and their loved ones. Footage showed the jet landing without wheels before skidding off the runway and crashing into a wall and then bursting into flames. 2 crew members were pulled to safety and they remain in a conscious condition, according to local officials. The crash is one of South Korea's deadliest air disasters, and investigations are now underway into what caused that failure and crash. The government here says that ruthless criminals are responsible for the deaths of 3 migrants after a small boat capsized in the English Channel today. In the early hours of this morning, a major rescue operation near Calais did save 45 people, with 4 still in hospital. Authorities warn the death toll could continue to rise. It follows news that over 1,300 migrants have now crossed the Channel since Christmas Day, despite the government's promise to smash the gangs behind those crossings. Labour is facing a countryside crisis as new polling has revealed that rural voters are angry at a planned tax raid on family farms. The Telegraph newspaper had a poll that suggests only 1 in 5 believe that Labour cares about the countryside's communities. Sir Keir Starmer's approval rating among rural voters is being described as catastrophic, with concerns now mounting over his so-called family farm tax. The Prime Minister is under pressure to also address the backlash after a major speech on his plan for change. 7 people have been arrested after an 18-year-old man was fatally stabbed in Derbyshire on Saturday night. Police found the young victim on Rose Avenue, but despite emergency efforts, he died nearby. Among those arrested are 4 17-year-old boys on suspicion of murder, while others are accused of helping an offender. Detectives are treating the case as isolated and they're appealing for any information to help with their investigation. Those are the latest headlines for now. A full roundup at 6 o'clock, and Nana will be back with you after this break.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Hello there, welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. Well, as we move into 2025, the weather is certainly turning much more unsettled across the country. A risk of some disruption in places as areas of low pressure move in. But at the moment, we still have high pressure across the south, keeping things fairly settled here. But weather fronts already providing plenty of rain across Scotland. And if anything, as we go through the course of the evening, that rain intensifies across parts of Scotland. Also, could just see some snow beginning to fall across the higher ground. Further south, a fairly quiet night to come, albeit rather cloudy, but that cloud cover will generally give us a fairly mild night. Although some clearer skies across the very far south, we could see lows here of around 3 to 5 degrees. So if we start Monday morning across Scotland, it's going to be a wet and potentially snowy start for some of us. Warnings are in force right throughout Monday, and that will continue into New Year's Eve and potentially New Year's Day too. So if you do have any Hogmanay travel plans, do stay up to date with the latest warnings. The rain also beginning to move into parts of Northern Ireland and Northern England too, but the further south you are, generally a dry start with maybe a few glimmers of sunshine. But for most of us, really, it's going to be a fairly cloudy Monday. The best of any brightness really will be reserved across the far south. But even here, we could just see a few showers develop. But for Scotland especially, a very wet picture here, although the far northwest may well just turn a little bit drier as we move into the afternoon. Mild for most of us, but up across the far north, we're just starting to see this cold air just begin to move a bit further south. So a pretty cold afternoon to come for much of northern Scotland. Into the evening, another band of rain then begins to move into Scotland, so turning wet once again with, again, risk of some snow in places. Remaining fairly quiet for the time being across the south, but for all of us, as we move into 2025, it's turning unsettled with the risk of some wind, rain and potentially snow.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/your-say. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Good afternoon, 37 minutes after 5 o'clock. Welcome to GB News. We are Britain's news channel. I'm Nana Akua. Before we get stuck into the debates, just a reminder, you can join us, GB News, for the ultimate countdown of 2025, to 2025 even. Bev, Patrick, Emily, Ben and Darren all together for a very special show. GB News is New Year's Eve live from 10 p.m. on New Year's Eve. You won't want to miss it. But now it's time for the Great British Debate. I'm asking, is the Great British High Street dead? Almost 170,000 retail workers lost their job during 2024 after a challenging year for many high street firms. And latest figures show that job losses this year increased by an astonishing 42%. That is compared with the previous year, 2023. So what do you think? Is the Great British High Street dead? Well, joining me now, my panel, journalist and political commentator Jonathan Liss, and also broadcaster and journalist Danny Kelly. Smile, Jonathan, it might not happen.
I think it already has.
Right, who's going to go first?
Well, listen,
you go first.
I've just been doing a bit of homework.
Have you?
So
first
time
he's
ever done this. Get me. I've just come off the phone from my contact at Walsall Council. 20% of their shops on the high street. Listen, Walsall, gritty West Midlands town. It's got an out-of-town luxury shopping centre. It's affected Walsall town centre. 20% of all shops are vacant. There's 8 charity shops on one road in Walsall Council. Do you know why there are so many charity shops? It's the sign of a failing high street. The reason is that whoever owns the property, even if it's vacant, so it's a shell because the previous shop has failed, that owner of the property still has to pay, in Walsall High Street's case, £25,000 a year rates, even if nothing's in there. Now, charitable, if you've got a charity shop, you don't pay business rates. That denies the central government 25k a year, and also you don't necessarily pay rent. So a landlord is allowing someone basically to have their shop rent-free and also rate-free, so the landlord doesn't pay the rate because of the charity status.
Is that right?
But the landlord's not earning any money then from the... Correct.
But he's also not losing money by paying...
That's exactly right, but that just illustrates the demise of the high street in some towns. Also, I've got some information that one of Walsall's shopping centres in the 1980s or 90s was bought for £60-odd million. Only recently, the real estate value has plummeted. In Walsall, it was sold for £1.25 million.
No.
Yes, this is indicative of how dead the high street is. Online shopping and also out-of-town luxury retail parks.
Jonathan Liss.
Well, it's a really difficult issue. There's no magic bullet for it. If there was, then people would fire it. We all want the high streets to be doing well. We all want sort of businesses to be thriving in this country. And obviously, there are a lot of things that are going wrong. I think, obviously, one of the reasons is that a lot of retail has gone online. So there are some businesses that are doing really well, but you just don't see them on the high street. But I think we need to look at other countries as well. I think that we have a real problem in this country that you go down any high street in England and they all sort of look the same shops, the same brands, because they're the only, the big multinational brands are the only businesses that can actually afford to be there because of the very, very high rate of rent. Yeah. You go to, sort of an Italian city or a German big city and it's not like that. You walk down the street and there aren't massive chains. You get a couple of sort of chain coffee shops maybe, but nothing like what we have in this country. There'll be independent pharmacies, independent sort of butchers, bakers. In Paris even, there's a boulangerie. So this cliche, there's a boulangerie on every corner. They're independent. You don't have any kind of equivalent to that here. And so that is one of the reasons that it's not just about a sort of a thriving retail sector. It also kind of preserves a kind of local culture in all, not just in individual cities in those European countries, but even the individual neighbourhoods will have their own sort of distinctive character. Whereas in this country, all too often, you might have very pretty streets, but they are populated by the exact same shops.
I wonder whether in Germany, or those countries you just mentioned, whether they have these punitive rates, like 25k. Yeah. And this is Walsall 25k a year for a small shop. Imagine what the rate is, I don't know, in the West End of London or in a thriving Birmingham city centre. We're probably talking 6 figures just because you have a presence. And the rates, by the way, I always used to think that the rates went to the local council. They don't. They go to central government. So it's in Labour's interest, or it's in all of our interest collectively, to ensure that the high street is thriving. Otherwise, they're going to be full of charity shops, and in Walsall's case, the Labour government is missing out on 25k
but that's the other
each
point.
shop.
That's the other point, I suppose, though, that things have unintended consequences. If we were to deny government more revenue, then that would obviously be really bad for public services, for example, and the things that keep our country going. So there has to be kind of like an equilibrium there somewhere.
There was a great story in one of the papers, I can't remember which one, about the increase in all of these, almost like pop-up barbers. All of a sudden there's a vacant shop and the next thing there's a Turkish barber there. There are 3 on the one high street in Warwick. There's probably about 20,000 people. It's a medieval town. There's a castle over there and there's 3 Turkish barber shops that have sprung up within the space of 6 months. Now, the Daily Mail, I'm not focusing on these 3 shops. All I'm doing is giving you an indicator as to the style of the article. But these shops have sprung up from nowhere, and the Daily Mail went to Coventry, nearby town from Warwick. And there's 4 of them, and they claim it's all money laundering.
Well, we always have a huge problem. About in the candy shops in central London. Oxford Street is now. It always was horrible, but it's now very much the worst place in the country, I think, with the candy shops there. And money laundering. The American candy shops.
You think? Well, I mean, obviously, if there's evidence of these things, people should be prosecuted for laundering money. But look, here we go. Lots of you have been getting in touch with all your thoughts. Alistair says, still say all British farmers should go on strike and refuse to sell any of the stock and give people a taste of what will be permanent if this continues. I mean, do you think farmers should go on strike to teach the government a lesson? I think farmers, they should have the courage of their moral conviction and continue it, yeah. Ian says Dim Ed Miliband and Just Stop Oil have forgotten that wind turbines require oil for gearbox lubrication, hydraulic systems and grease for bearings. Lots of oil. Do you think that the climate...
Not barrels of oil just to grease a cog, is it? It's just a bit of WD-40.
No, but there's lots of them, though, aren't there? There's lots of...
there's lots of WD-40.
So you think a little handheld WD-40 would be enough?
No, I'm trivialising it, but that guy is exaggerating. The claim is exaggerated.
No, but he's talking about oil as well, so they need...
Yeah, but he's talking about grease.
And grease for bearings. There's a few things, though, that
need a bit of grease.
Yeah, so they all need oil. So you can't do it without oil.
Don't need to find a new oil bed. Just to grease a few cogs.
Is we can't just get rid of oil, which is... this is what people are saying. Neil in Yorkshire said all the left, including some GB guests, are repeating the trope, why should wealthy landowners avoid paying their fair share of tax? That really disgusts me, as it is disingenuous, although some people believe the spin. That's what somebody said there. Wendy is talking about the farmer who was on early with his son. She says this fabulous farmer and his lovely son are the best of British. Very best wishes to farmers in 2025. No farmers, no future. We support our farmers. Getting a lot of support on here from people supporting farmers. Grumpy Grandad has texted a message in saying biofuels is another con. It takes carbon out of the atmosphere to make it, but the second you burn those fuels, it puts the same carbon back into the atmosphere. It just circulates the carbon. It doesn't remove it. If you want to get rid of carbon, plant trees. It's the best tech out there. So true. Do you know that? We just need to plant more trees and stop them from deforesting the Amazon. Which sounds a lot easier than it probably is.
In fact, I think in Birmingham it was mooted that they were going to have a wall of flowers or something, not trees going through the city centre, which would capture all the carbon. So, and there is evidence around, and maybe in Holland. I know you're on holiday off to Amsterdam or the Netherlands. So I've just broken that news for
the nation holds its breath.
We all wait.
But they...
I don't think this is going to be an interesting story.
You don't. It's about fat people flying. Oh, sorry.
We're not on
Danny.
Oh, I can't wait.
Get with the schedule.
We're going for a break first, but I've got to say, lots of people getting in touch. Live in Hope, she or he says, so China realised years ago about the importance of net zero. They are the production leaders of solar panels and wind farms, but they still use coal. And now, as of 2023, 85 nuclear power plants, 20 under construction and 70 planned. Exactly. What is coming up? Stay tuned. Supplement Sunday, where my panel and I will discuss some of the stories that you may have missed. You won't want to go anywhere.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
Joining me now is food historian and author of Christmas with Dickens, Pen Vogler. Pen, let's start with Christmas Carol. Did A Christmas Carol change Britain's view of Christmas?
I think it did, enormously. Before then, people were beginning to think, as they do now, that Christmas might be being a little bit commercial. It was too much food and drink, not enough kind of seriousness or not enough kind of love and family. And what Dickens did with A Christmas Carol was show people who were coming to the cities, who were kind of losing their rural history, a new way of celebrating Christmas, that a real, just a family could get together and love and kind of get around the table together. And whereas before, a lot of those kind of Christmas dishes would have been seasonal, lots of people would have eaten them at different times of the year, Dickens does two things. He takes the goose, which is what the Cratchits are going to eat, and he turns it to a turkey, much bigger, meatier, kind of more generous. And then he takes this thing that he never calls Christmas pudding in A Christmas Carol. There's no Christmas pudding. He only calls it plum pudding, and he anchors it to that day. And interestingly, after then, people start publishing recipes for Christmas pudding, and it starts getting its name, Christmas pudding, from plum pudding. And I think all of that really comes from A Christmas Carol.
You say becomes a Christmas pudding almost immediately after A Christmas Carol is published.
Yes, I mean, it's occasionally called Christmas pudding before, but not often. And then a very famous for the time, the kind of Delia Smith of her day, lady called Eliza Acton, publishes a recipe called The Author's Christmas Pudding in 1845. And we know she's a big Dickens fan because she sent a copy of her cookbook to him.
GB News, the People's Channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial. And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Right, it's time for Supplement Sunday, where my pal and I share some of the stories that have caught their eye today. Jonathan, let's start with you. Lego lost at sea.
Yeah, so this is a great story. This is hundreds of pieces of Lego lost at sea off a cargo ship 27 years ago have been found this year, including the first ever shark. So this is about 62 shipping containers of Lego thrown into the sea off Land's End in February 1997, and hundreds of them have been washing up, and thousands of them actually have been washing up in the shore near.
Why did they throw the shipping containers over the edge?
It was a freak wave. It wasn't sabotage. It wasn't like a treasure hunt gone wrong.
Wow,
really.
that is, and if you find anything washed up on a beach, probably besides bales of cocaine,
so
you
like
can
treasure.
keep them.
It's like, I don't think it applies to Lego, Danny.
You can keep anything. No, there's a law that if you find something washed up on a beach,
it's treasure. It's Lego.
Well,
although they're saying that some is quite rare, actually. Yeah. Some is worth quite a lot of money because it's rare. Because obviously, so many of the pieces were lost. Yeah. But actually, the sharks are worth a lot of money. If you happen to find a sort of a Lego shark off the coast of Cornwall, you could be in for a bit of a payday.
Right.
Danny Kelly, your one.
Should overweight people... I see you're looking at me. Should overweight people, when you fly, get on a plane, should you be weighed alongside your luggage? Because the argument is that you're only allowed a certain amount of luggage weight because of fuel economy and about how much weight the plane can handle. So should you, if you're overweight like I'm overweight, it'd be a great spectator sport at checking, wouldn't it? You'd all be look at that fat idiot coming. Let's get him on the scales.
I think actually, if the whole thing is based on weight, they do need to know how heavy the plane is going to be. Yeah. So I would say that only for the actual safety, that people who are overweight should be weighed, because you need to know how much weight the plane is carrying.
If you're on a little sort of private aircraft, they take the weight seriously, incredibly seriously. So on my side, if there's 6 seats and everyone was as large and as overweight as me, then the pilot would say, "I'm sorry about this, lads. You know, one of you is going to have to get off." Preferably
before you take off
over a stretch of water.
But the thing is, people might take it personally. Oh, you're upsetting me. And it's like,
of course, they'll take it personally. It's incredibly shaming.
But it's not shaming. plane because it's about reality that the plane needs. There's a certain amount of weight that the plane cannot take off if you've gone over that. So I think people should be weighed. Yes, I wouldn't have a problem with it, even if I was overweight.
One thing I always find a bit strange is when the plane sort of says that we need to allocate a seat so we can distribute the weight, but they don't know what your weight is. So how can that possibly be?
They're distributing the weight of the baggage underneath. That's all they've worked out, but they don't know what your weight is.
That's what I always find strange.
Stewards would have to say,
how they have to do it.
Fat lad coming up. Right, fatty over there. Now his very
thin... I've been back at school.
His very thin wife has got to go over there, which might not be any bad thing.
I don't think it's about safety, it's about economy, isn't it? Because if the plane could be... If a sort of 737 or something can be affected by your weight, then that's a bigger problem.
No, it could be, depending on how many people are that heavy on the plane. So, of course, the plane works on weight. Listen, my one is this. Listen, people, the shops have just stopped selling Christmas stuff, but now they're selling Easter eggs. Easter eggs are on sale already, yes.
Christmas month.
On sale in supermarkets at Christmas. Customers at Sainsbury's, Morrison's, Co-op, Tesco and Asda have all reported seeing the next festive treats on offer before the turn of
He's only just been born. He can't die yet.
Well, we didn't realise... he's going to come back, though, because of Easter, isn't it? He goes and then comes back, so the eggs are out.
But you do see that very prematurely, don't you? See, shops are always selling things early. Always.
They always do. Well, listen, on today's show, which has been a busy one, I've been asking... where's the question for today's show? Is it not on here?
About Nigel Farage, isn't it?
Yes, but I don't have the answer on the Twitter poll, so I can't answer.
I imagine that your viewers are in favour.
It would be overwhelmingly in favour. Whatever Farage is up to, it's overwhelmingly in favour of it.
Yes. What do you think?
I think the Twitter poll will reveal that GBNews...
I think that your viewers will be quite pro-Farage.
Behind
I reckon 95%, 95% of your viewers want more Farage on GB News. Am I right?
Well, I don't know. I haven't got a clue. It should be on X. But listen, you'll have to check out the poll. I'll try and check it out myself. Quite happy for that little hand grenade right there. It's good, isn't it? Right. But listen, it's really good to have your company this afternoon. Thank you so much to my panel joining me, broadcaster and journalist Danny Kelly. Hey. Danny, always a pleasure.
Thank you.
And also journalist and political commentator Jonathan Les.
Thank you.
Very much, Jonathan. And also, thank you so much to you at home for your company. It's been a pleasure, as ever. I look forward to seeing you on Friday at 9:30. Have a fabulous evening. Next up, you've got loads, but also don't forget to stay with GB News.
A chilly start will give way to a lovely, warm afternoon. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. Well, as we move towards the New Year period, the weather is going to be very unsettled. All of us seeing a spell of rain at times and also some strong winds, and in the north could also see some snow. Out there at the moment as we end the Sunday, still got high pressure in the south, keeping things settled here, but weather fronts already across Scotland. And as we move through the course of the night, the rain here is going to intensify, some heavy and persistent rain developing. Also some snow as it bumps up into some colder air, especially across the northern half of the country. Warnings do come into effect overnight and they'll continue right into the New Year period. So if you do have any travel plans, do stay up to date with the latest warnings. Elsewhere, it's a fairly quiet start to Monday, but as we zoom into Scotland, you can see plenty of rain and also some snow in places. So a very tricky start to the day here. And unfortunately, there's not going to be much improvement in parts of Scotland throughout the course of the day. Some rain also just knocking on the doorsteps of Northern Ireland, maybe some patchy rain also for Northern England. But for the rest of England and Wales, generally a dry start, albeit rather cloudy. But some breaks in the cloud will develop as the winds continue to freshen. Could come quite strong across parts of the Pennines at times, could see some buffeting on the roads here. But really the lion's share of the wind and rain will be across the north. Some colder air also beginning to seep further south across Scotland, so increasingly cold here with, again, risk of some winteriness in places. But further south, it's generally going to be another mild day. And then for New Year's Eve, a very unsettled picture across the north of the country. Further wind, snow and rain warnings in force here. Fairly dry initially across the south, but some of this rain will spread its way southeastwards as we go through the course of the day. After a very brief calmer interlude, maybe around the bells, another weather system moving in for New Year's Day, bringing a renewed risk of rain, wind and snow.
A nice bright morning will generate a lovely warm day. right through to the evening. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
There's still plenty of time to grab your chance to win our biggest cash prize ever, an incredible £50,000. What would you spend £50,000 on in the coming year? Spectacular holidays, a brand new car, home improvements, or maybe you'd just like to save it